Hey there, tonight we're diving into the brutal rituals of ancient Maya priests. Not the Hollywood version, you know, but a world where a priest's toolkit included stingray spines and obsidian blades. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. If you were a Maya priest, your alarm clock wasn't a gentle chime or soothing melody. It was probably a cosmic event. You'd wake up, blink at the rising sun, and get straight to business with the universe. Forget checking your email. You're scanning the stars, because in your world, everything from the right time to plant corn to the best moment for a bloodletting ceremony is written in the sky. Now, speaking of bloodletting, let's dive into that juicy topic, quite literally. You, as a priest, are no stranger to a bit of self-inflicted pain. It's not just for kicks or some twisted hobby, it's a direct line to the gods. You see, the Maya believe that the gods gave their blood to create humans, so it's only fair to return the favor. This isn't just a nick on the finger either. Think thorns, stingray spines, or obsidian blades. You perform these rituals regularly, and not just on yourself. High-ranking nobles got in on the action too. This wasn't a solo show. It was a community affair, with everyone watching and presumably cringing. But why go to such extremes, you ask? It's all about the cosmos, baby. The Maya cosmos is a complex, multi-layered universe where everything is connected. You, as a priest, are the ultimate cosmic influencer. Your bloodletting isn't just personal sacrifice. It's a cosmological act, ensuring the balance between the earthly realm and the divine. Your rituals are the spiritual glue holding the universe together, making you a big deal both in heaven and on earth. In case you think this is all about spirituality, think again. You're a priest, sure, but also a political heavyweight. You're not just predicting eclipses. You're wielding power like a seasoned politician. Your rituals and prophecies can make or break a king's reputation. You're the ancient world's equivalent of a celebrity guru, with influence stretching across city-states like Tikal and Kapan. Your daily routine is like a high-stakes game of cosmic chess. Every move, every ritual, is carefully calculated to maintain your status and keep the political machine running smoothly. Your influence is derived from divine knowledge, or at least the perception of it, and you're not above using that to your advantage. You strut around in your ceremonial garb, feathers, jade, and all the bling the ancient world can offer. You've got people hanging on your every word, and let's not forget the perks. Gifts from nobles, a front-row seat to every major event, and the power to sway decisions that affect thousands. But all this comes with a heavy dose of responsibility. A misstep in your predictions or a botched ceremony could lead to political upheaval or worse, cosmic chaos. But let's not romanticize this too much. While the image of the all-powerful priest is appealing, the reality is a bit grittier. The pressure is immense, and the consequences of failure could be dire. You're constantly balancing on a knife's edge, both literally and figuratively. And while your rituals might seem like a mystical performance, they're also a means of control, both over the spiritual realm and the people around you. So, next time you're sipping your morning coffee, be glad you're not tasked with maintaining cosmic order through painful rituals and political maneuvering. Yet, isn't it fascinating how in a world without smartphones and social media, a single individual could wield such power just by reading the stars and spilling a bit of blood? The Maya priests were the rock stars of their time, blending spirituality, politics, and a dash of showmanship into a complex role that shaped their civilization. And you, as one of these priests, would be at the very heart of this cosmic and earthly drama. So, as you walk through the bustling cityscape of Tikal, maybe dodging a stray chicken or two, you're not just a priest, you're essentially an ancient event planner. And today's main event, the notorious heart extraction ceremony, the piece de resistance of Maya sacrificial practices. Now, before you get queasy, let's talk logistics. This isn't just a spontaneous act of violence. It's a carefully orchestrated spectacle, akin to a big-budget Hollywood production, but with a lot more blood and fewer CGI effects. First, let's address the elephant in the room. Why the heart? It's all about life force, or as the Maya would say, CH Shulul. The heart, seen as the seat of the soul and life's essence, is the grand prize in this cosmic transaction. It's the VIP ticket to appeasing the gods. But you can't just grab any random person off the street. Oh no, this requires a special guest, an individual of great importance, often a war captive or a voluntarily chosen noble, who would be celebrated and feted before their demise. Imagine the economic implications of this. The cost of staging such an event was astronomical by ancient standards. You needed a whole team prepping the ceremonial plaza, an array of participants decked out in their finest feathers and jade. Let's not forget the sacrificial victim, who would be adorned like a king. The resources poured into these ceremonies could feed an entire village for weeks. The Maya didn't do things by halves. When they wanted to impress the gods, they went all in. But why go through all this trouble? Well, it's not just about keeping the gods off their backs. There's a political angle too. These events served as a powerful tool for maintaining social order. By holding these elaborate rituals, rulers reinforced their divine right to power. It was their way of saying, look, the gods approve of my leadership, and here's the proof. It was also a not-so-subtle reminder of their control over life and death. Talk about a power move. Now, the heart extraction itself was performed with surgical precision. The event was conducted on the top of a pyramid, with the whole city watching. The priest, that's you of course, would wield an obsidian blade, sharper than any modern scalpel. In a swift motion, you'd open the chest cavity and extract the still-beating heart. Gruesome, absolutely. But in a world where symbolism reigned supreme, this act was the ultimate cosmic offering. The aftermath was just as important as the act itself. The body would often be displayed as a symbol of victory and divine favor. The heart, once offered, was believed to ascend to the heavens, ensuring a bountiful harvest or victory in battle. This was ancient PR at its finest, a testament to the lengths rulers would go to maintain their grip on power. So, what's the takeaway here? The heart extraction ceremony was more than just a religious rite. It was a carefully choreographed performance with deep economic and political undertones. It served as a reminder of the delicate balance between life and death, power and subservience, earth and the divine. It was a bloody affair, sure, but one that held the fabric of Maya society together in ways that were as complex as they were brutal. Next time you grumble about the cost of a concert ticket, remember that the Maya poured their resources into these sacrificial ceremonies to keep their world turning. It was an investment in cosmic stability, a wager that the gods would smile upon their endeavors. In the end, the heart extraction was as much about the living as it was about the dead, a stark reminder that in the Maya world, the price of divine favor was paid in blood. And speaking of investments, let's dive into the myth of the mystical Maya priesthood. If your mental image of a Maya priest is some kind of serene, all-knowing sage, cloaked in mystery and incense smoke, prepare to shed that Hollywood veneer. The truth is, these guys were more like CEOs of a cosmic corporation, balancing ledgers of blood and prophecy with the dexterity of a Wall Street trader on a caffeine high. Now, let's address those rituals that make modern-day ayahuasca retreats look like kindergarten nap time. The Maya priests were serious about their spiritual jaunts, often aided by a little pharmacological boost. Hallucinogens were their direct line to the divine, their mystical Wi-Fi, if you will. But before you imagine a bunch of priests lounging around in a haze of psychedelic bliss, let's talk specifics. The Maya used substances like balshay, a fermented drink made from the bark of the Lanchacarpus tree, mixed with honey, basically a spiritual cocktail. Then there were the mushrooms, specifically psilocybe species, which might sound familiar if you've ever heard tales from the more adventurous corners of the 1960s. The consumption of these hallucinogens was part of a highly ritualized process, not some casual weekend trip. The goal, to communicate with the gods and ancestors, to peer into the cosmic abyss and bring back wisdom, or at least something that sounded wise after a few rounds of balshay. Here's where it gets interesting. There's a fine line between divine vision and what we might call a really bad trip. When you're seeing jaguars dancing in the sky and hearing the whispered secrets of the universe, the interpretation is everything. The priests, in their altered states, were tasked with deciphering these cosmic riddles, often with high stakes attached. Predicting the wrong date for a harvest or battle could mean disaster. Talk about pressure. In terms of economic impact, these rituals weren't just spiritual exercises. They were integral to the community's social and political fabric. The priest's visions could influence major decisions, from war strategies to agricultural practices. The use of hallucinogens was a tool for maintaining power, a way to assert the priest's unique ability to commune with the divine. It was like having a heartline to the gods, with the priest acting as the ultimate intermediary, provided the line wasn't too fuzzy from the substances. But let's not sugarcoat it. The reality behind these mystical experiences could be pretty gritty. Picture this: a priest, eyes glazed, spouting prophecies that could change the fate of nations, all while navigating the side effects of his spiritual cocktail. It's a wonder any coherent message emerged at all. Yet, the community placed immense trust in these visions, highlighting the delicate balance between belief and skepticism in ancient societies. Hollywood loves to paint these priests as mystical shamans, but the truth is far more complex. They were political operators, wielding their perceived divine connection as a tool of power. Their ability to influence the masses relied heavily on their skills as performers, as much as their spiritual prowess. Every ritual was a carefully staged production, designed to reinforce the social hierarchy and keep the wheels of Maya society turning. So, when you think about those Maya priests, imagine them not just as spiritual guides, but as master manipulators of public perception, blending showmanship with a dash of divine insight. In a world where the line between the earthly and the divine was razor-thin, these priests walked it with the precision of a tightrope artist, forever teetering between cosmic order and chaos. And as we leave the priests to their divine musings, remember that the truth behind those mystical rituals is as much about human ingenuity and power dynamics as it is about spirituality. The Maya priesthood wasn't just about talking to gods. It was about wielding influence in a world where the stakes were as high as the pyramids themselves. Now, let's peel back another layer of this cosmic onion and see how these brutal rituals shaped the social and political landscape of Maya society. You see, in a world where the line between the divine and the mundane was about as thin as the edge of an obsidian blade, these bloody spectacles did far more than just keep the guards entertained. They kept the social hierarchy firmly in place. It's like ancient insurance for the elite's power, where the premiums were paid in blood. First up, let's talk class divisions. The Maya society was a complex pyramid. No, not the stone kind, though they had plenty of those, but a social one, with the king and the priesthood perched comfortably at the top. Meanwhile, the common folk toiled away at the base, probably wondering why they couldn't just sacrifice fruit instead. These rituals were a not-so-subtle reminder of who was in charge. The elite orchestrated these events, reinforcing their divine mandate to rule. It was their way of saying, we're not just rulers, we're divinely appointed intermediaries. And who were the masses to argue? After all, the guards seemed to be on the elite's speed dial. The political angle, well, it wasn't just about maintaining power, but also about distributing it strategically. By involving nobles and high-ranking warriors in these bloodletting ceremonies, the elite kept potential rivals close and invested in the system. Think of it as an ancient version of corporate team-building exercises, but with an edge, literally. This participation was both a privilege and a reminder. Join us in this sacred duty, or you might find yourself on the altar. It was a classic case of keeping your friends close and your enemies closer, with a little extra blood thrown in for good measure. Now, let's tread into the environmental arena. Ever wonder about the environmental cost of running a celestial show of this scale? Spoiler alert, it was steep. The Maya's love for ritual fires, which were essential to every major ceremony, came with a hefty price tag for the forest. Deforestation was rampant, as trees were felled to fuel these sacred blazes. It's estimated that in some areas, up to 70% of the forest was cleared for agricultural and ritual purposes. Imagine the Maya landscape, once lush and vibrant, gradually morphing into a scene more fit for a post-apocalyptic film. The long-term consequences, well, they were anything but divine. Soil erosion, loss of biodiversity, and climate shifts likely contributed to the eventual decline of some Maya city-states. It's a classic case of too much of a good thing turning sour. The very rituals meant to appease the gods and ensure the community's prosperity might have inadvertently sown the seeds of its decline. Talk about cosmic irony. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. The appeal of these rituals wasn't just in their ability to maintain control. They were also deeply ingrained in the cultural psyche. The allure of participating in something so grand, so significant, couldn't be denied. It was like being part of the ultimate reality show, with a front-row seat to the most dramatic events of the time. And for the elite, it was a chance to demonstrate their power, to be the stars of the show in a society where the divine drama played out daily. Yet, beneath the glamour and the gore, these rituals were a reminder of the harsh realities of Maya life. They reinforced the social order, ensured the elite's dominance, and kept the cosmic balance, at least for a time. So, next time you're pondering the mysteries of the universe, remember that for the Maya, the answers were often found in blood, sweat, and tears, their own kind of cosmic currency. But hang on, because there's more to this tale of power, class, and cosmic order. As we unravel the threads of Maya society, it becomes clear that the rituals were more than just spiritual exercises. They were the glue that held their world together, for better or worse. And as we dive deeper into the complexities of Maya civilization, it's evident that their story is a testament to the intricate dance between power, belief, and the environment, a dance that, for the Maya, was both their strength and their Achilles heel. So, as we unravel the threads of Maya society, their rituals weren't just spiritual exercises. They were the glue that held their world together, albeit one that would eventually crack under its own weight. Now, let's dive into the decline of these once mighty rituals and the eventual fall of the Maya civilization. Spoiler alert, it wasn't as quick or as dramatic as the fall of Rome, but more like a slow-motion tumble, with a few cosmic twists. Picture the Maya world during its terminal classic period, roughly around 800 to 1000 CE. The once bustling city-states like Tikal and Kapan were gradually turning into ghost towns. It wasn't a sudden lights-out moment. Instead, it was a series of unfortunate events that would make even Lemony Snicket nod in approval. A combination of environmental degradation, political strife, and perhaps a little too much reliance on that celestial heartline contributed to their decline. First up, let's address the environmental elephant in the room. As we mentioned earlier, the Maya weren't exactly tree huggers. Their love for grandiose rituals meant rampant deforestation, leading to soil erosion and a decline in agricultural productivity. The Maya heartland, once a verdant paradise, was slowly transforming into a barren landscape. By the time they realized the cosmic price of their environmental tab, it was too late. The gods might have enjoyed a good fiery show, but Mother Nature was not impressed. Now, toss in some political drama. The Maya city-states were like ancient Game of Thrones kingdoms, but with fewer dragons and more obsidian blades. As resources dwindled, competition among city-states intensified, leading to wars and alliances as changeable as a teenager's mood. These conflicts drained resources and destabilized the region, further exacerbating the decline. The once cohesive political landscape splintered into a patchwork of warring factions, each trying to out-sacrifice the other to win divine favor. And then there's the cosmic angle. The Maya priests, once esteemed for their ability to read the stars, found themselves in a celestial pickle. As agricultural yields plummeted and political unrest simmered, their predictions and rituals started losing their charm. The gods weren't responding, or perhaps the priests were reading the cosmic tea leaves wrong. Whatever the case, the people lost faith in their divine intermediaries. The heartline to the heavens was on the fritz, and the priests were running out of credit. Despite this slow unraveling, the Maya civilization didn't vanish overnight. Even as major city-states were abandoned, smaller communities persisted, adapting to the changing world. It's a testament to the resilience of the Maya people, who found ways to survive even when their grand rituals and political structures crumbled around them. But let's not sugarcoat it. This decline was a harsh reality check. The elaborate rituals and political machinations that once held their world together eventually contributed to their unraveling. It's cosmic irony at its finest. The very acts meant to appease the gods and ensure the prosperity of the Maya ended up sowing the seeds of their downfall. So, what lessons can we glean from the rise and fall of the Maya civilization? For one, it's a reminder that even the most sophisticated societies can overextend themselves, especially when they start believing their own cosmic press releases. The Mayas' complex rituals and cosmic calculations were integral to their identity, Yet they also highlighted the precarious balance between human ambition and environmental sustainability. Yet, the fascination with the Maya endures. There's something captivating about a civilization that seemed to have one foot firmly planted in the heavens and the other in the blood-soaked earth. Their legacy is a blend of awe and horror, a tale of ingenuity and excess that still sparks admiration today. From their monumental architecture to their advanced understanding of astronomy, the Maya achieved incredible feats without the aid of modern technology. At the same time, their story serves as a cautionary tale. It's a stark reminder of the consequences of ignoring environmental limits and the perils of investing too much power in a select few. The Maya civilization is a testament to human creativity and resilience, yet also a sobering reflection on our capacity for hubris. So, as you tuck yourself in tonight, ponder the mysteries of the Maya, their rituals, their rise, and their eventual fall. Remember, in the grand cosmic dance, even the mightiest can stumble, especially when the music stops and the lights dim on their celestial stage. And who knows? Maybe, just maybe, there's a little Maya priest in all of us, trying to keep the universe from unraveling one sacrifice at a time. In the bustling bazaar of history, where drama competes with dust for dominance, the story of the Abbasid Caliphate's rise is like a high-stakes poker game played by some of the most influential figures of the 8th century. Imagine a cross between a family reunion and a hostile corporate takeover, with a dash of revolutionary fervor thrown in for good measure. It all kicks off in 750 CE, a year that saw a world-changing shift in power that would make Game of Thrones look like a neighborhood squabble over a misplaced lawn gnome. At the heart of this power shift was the Abbasid family, claiming descent from none other than Abbas, uncle to the prophet Muhammad himself. Now, claiming family ties to the prophet was akin to winning the historical lottery. It gave the Abbasids a legitimacy that was hard to rival, even if it sometimes felt like everyone and their cousin claimed the same lineage. But in this game, the Abbasids held the aces: ambition, opportunity, and a hefty dose of Persian support. Speaking of Persians, let's not underestimate their role here. They were the discontented minority under the Umayyad Caliphate, which had been running the show from Damascus. The Umayyads were like that one guy at the office who hogs all the credit but doesn't know how to share the printer. Their Arab-centric policies left the Persians and other non-Arabs feeling like second-class citizens, which is never a good look when you're trying to run a multinational empire. Enter the Abbasids, who promised more inclusivity, a bit like the political version of a feel-good movie where everyone gets a hug at the end. Spoiler alert, it wasn't all rainbows and butterflies. To make their move, the Abbasids capitalized on a wave of dissatisfaction sweeping across the empire. They didn't just waltz in and seize power. They orchestrated a campaign that was as strategic as it was ruthless. In 747 C, the Abbasid revolution kicked off in Khorasan, a region in modern-day Iran. Under the leadership of Abu Muslim, an enigmatic figure who remains shrouded in as much mystery as a premium cable TV character, they rallied support. Abu Muslim was the charismatic frontman, and his success in rallying Persian and non-Arab support was the Abbasids' ticket to the big leagues. By 750 C, the Abbasids had toppled the Umayyads, leaving the once mighty dynasty with little more than a few loyalists and a dusty road out of town. The Umayyad Caliph, Marwan Roman II, met his end in a manner befitting a Shakespearean tragedy or a particularly grim episode of a medieval soap opera. With their rivals out of the way, the Abbasids took the reins and set about transforming their newly won empire. One of their first major moves was shifting the capital from Damascus to Baghdad in 762 CE. This wasn't just a matter of picking a city with better real estate prices or a cooler climate. It was a calculated decision that put the seat of power smack in the middle of a vibrant crossroads of trade routes. Think of Baghdad as the Silicon Valley of its day, but with more camels and fewer tech startups. By positioning themselves in Baghdad, the Abbasids tapped into the lucrative trade networks that connected China to Europe, making it not just a political center, but an economic powerhouse. Baghdad quickly became the jewel of the Abbasid crown, a city that would eventually earn the moniker City of Peace. Of course, peace is relative, especially when your city is a melting pot of cultures. languages, the occasional political intrigue. At its height, Baghdad was home to over 1 million people, a staggering number for the time, and it featured libraries, universities, and grand palaces that would make even the most extravagant modern-day billionaire's mansion look like a starter home. But let's not kid ourselves. This golden age wasn't equally golden for everyone. While the elite enjoyed the spoils of trade and intellectual pursuits, the average Joe, or more accurately, the average Jafar, had to contend with the daily grind of life in a bustling metropolis. The economic boom fueled by trade did trickle down, but it was more of a drip than a downpour. The gap between the haves and have-nots was as wide as the Euphrates, a reminder that progress can often be a double-edged sword. And while we're on the subject of swords, let's not forget the Abbasids' military prowess. They maintained a formidable army, which was both a symbol of their power and a necessity in a world where threats could emerge as quickly as rumors at a royal court. The Abbasid military was renowned not just for its numbers, but for its diversity, drawing on the empire's vast pool of talent, from Persian cavalry to Arab infantry and Turkish mercenaries. It was as much an army as it was a mosaic of the cultures under Abbasid rule. So, as the Abbasid Caliphate settled into its role as a global powerhouse, it's worth noting that their success was a cocktail of strategic brilliance, a knack for diplomacy, and a little bit of luck. They turned a family feud into a world-changing empire, drawing on the dissatisfaction of the masses and the ambition of a few key players. It was a heady mix that set the stage for an era that would leave an indelible mark on Islamic culture and beyond. As we delve deeper into their story, remember that history is rarely as simple as it seems, and the Abbasids were nothing if not complex. Speaking of complexity, the Abbasids weren't content merely ruling an empire, they wanted to illuminate it. Enter the House of Wisdom, Baghdad's answer to the age-old question. What if we stuck all the world's knowledge in one place and threw open the doors? This wasn't some exclusive club for scholarly elites sipping tea and debating the finer points of Aristotle while stroking their beards, though those beards were probably magnificent. No, this was a bustling hub of intellectual activity, teeming with translators, scientists, and philosophers from all corners of the known world. It was a place where languages mingled as freely as the perfumes in a medieval souk. Founded in the early 9th century by Caliph Al-Mamun, the House of Wisdom was a testament to the Abbasids' obsession with knowledge. Al-Mamun himself was a bit of a nerd, if we're being honest, with a passion for Greek philosophy that bordered on fanatical. If the ancient Greeks had fan clubs, he would have been president, treasurer, and possibly the one writing fan fiction on the side. He saw in their works a treasure trove of wisdom just waiting to be unlocked by the keys of translation. And translate they did. The Abbasids embarked on a translation movement that would put modern-day linguists to shame. They were like the Google Translate of the medieval world, but with slightly more human error. Scholars translated texts from Greek, Persian, Sanskrit, and Syriac into Arabic, creating a compendium of knowledge that spanned astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. They didn't just stop at translating. They critiqued, expanded, and debated these works, creating a vibrant intellectual tapestry that was as rich as it was diverse. Now, before you start picturing these scholars as infallible intellectual giants, let's burst that bubble right away. Sure, they were brilliant, but they also lived in a pre-plumbing world where fixing a leaky faucet might have been as challenging as solving Fermat's last theorem. And despite their achievements, they were still human, with all the quirks and foibles that entails. We can admire their work and still chuckle at the fact that they probably argued over who got to sit closest to the window on hot days. One of the most significant contributions to arise from this intellectual hotbed was in the field of mathematics. Enter Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, the man who would give the world algebra, and inadvertently, generations of high school students a reason to groan. Al-Khwarizmi's work on algebra was revolutionary, providing a systematic way to solve linear and quadratic equations. His book, the compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing, laid the groundwork for what would become a cornerstone of modern mathematics. And while many a student has cursed his name during late-night study sessions, it's hard to overstate the impact of his work on fields ranging from engineering to economics. But let's not get carried away with the romance of it all.
While Al-Khwarizmi's algebra is a blessing for its problem-solving prowess, it's also a curse for those who'd rather count on their fingers than wrestle with variables. The very term algebra comes from the Arabic word al-jaba, meaning reunion of broken parts, which is an apt description for both the mathematical process and the emotional state of anyone tackling a particularly tricky equation. And it wasn't just numbers that got a makeover. Astronomical advancements were also on the menu, with scholars like al-Battani making observations that would influence future luminaries like Copernicus. Al-Battani refined Ptolemy's work, accurately calculating the length of the solar year and the timing of solar and lunar eclipses. His tables were so precise that they remained in use for centuries, long before the days when we could rely on smartphones to tell us when to expect the next blood moon. But why stop at the stars? The Abbasids were also keen on medicine, with luminaries like Al-Razi, known in the West as Rhazes, pushing the boundaries of medical knowledge. He wrote extensively on subjects ranging from smallpox to surgery, laying the groundwork for modern practices. Al-Razi's Kitab al-Hawi, or Comprehensive Book of Medicine, was a veritable encyclopedia of medical knowledge, drawing on sources from across the known world. And while he might not have had access to MRI machines or antibiotics, his contributions were nothing short of groundbreaking for the time. Of course, amidst these intellectual pursuits, the practical realities of running an empire loomed large. The House of Wisdom wasn't just about academic enlightenment, it was also a tool of statecraft. By championing knowledge, the Abbasids were able to consolidate their power, attract talent from distant lands, and reinforce their legitimacy. In a world where a well-placed dagger could end a reign as quickly as a poorly cooked kebab could spoil a feast, knowledge was as crucial a weapon as any sword. And speaking of swords, let's not forget the Abbasids' knack for diplomacy and intrigue. They were as adept at playing the political chessboard as they were at fostering intellectual growth. By promoting cultural and intellectual exchange, they were able to maintain a delicate balance of power, ensuring that their empire remained a beacon of enlightenment in a world often shrouded in darkness. But as we marvel at the Abbasids' achievements, it's important to remember that their golden age was built on the backs of many who didn't share in its glory. While scholars debated the nature of the cosmos, the average citizen grappled with the more immediate concerns of daily life in a bustling metropolis. The House of Wisdom was a place of dreams, but beyond its walls, the harsh realities of medieval life were never far away. So, as we ponder the legacy of the Abbasids and their House of Wisdom, let's hold in our minds both the brilliance and the burdens of their age. It was a time of breathtaking intellectual achievement, yet one that also reflected the complexities and contradictions of human nature. And as we continue to delve into this remarkable chapter of history, let's remember that the past is never as simple or as distant as it seems. But let's leave the ivory towers of wisdom for a moment and dive into the bustling, aromatic world of Abbasid culture and cuisine. A world where the scent of spiced lamb drifted over the Tigris and culinary experimentation was as bold as a new Netflix series. Forget about the flatbreads and lentils of yore. The Abbasid elite feasted on dishes that would make a 5-star chef weep with envy. Think roasted peacock, stuffed camel, and all the saffron your spice rack can handle. These weren't just meals, they were culinary spectacles, complete with all the pomp and pageantry of a royal wedding. Now, before you start picturing everyone in Baghdad lounging around with a goblet of pomegranate wine, let's set the record straight. The average Abbasid citizen wasn't dining on exotic meats or sipping imported libations. The reality was more pita bread and chickpeas than peacock tail and wild spices. The culinary divide was as wide as the physical distance between the caliph's palace and the nearest souk, where the hustle was real and the bargains were fierce. But for the Abbasid elite, food was a tool of diplomacy and status. A loaded banquet table was as much a statement of power as a well-fortified city wall. The Abbasids understood that the way to a diplomat's heart was through their stomach, and they used food as a persuasive tool in negotiations. Picture it, a visiting dignitary, overwhelmed by the sheer opulence of an Abbasid feast, suddenly finds himself more amenable to political alliances. It's hard to say no when you've just been treated to a dish of quail eggs in rosewater syrup. This wasn't just hospitality, it was strategy served with a side of honey cakes.
But let's switch gears from the dining room to the scriptorium, where another cultural revolution was quietly unfurling. You see, while the elite were busy with their gastronomic escapades, the rest of the Abbasid world was getting rather excited about something that would change the course of history: paper. Yes, that humble, crinkly stuff we now take for granted was a game-changer in the 8th and 9th centuries. The Abbasids were the first in the Islamic world to adopt paper, thanks to a little technological borrowing from the Chinese at the Battle of Talas in 751 CE. It was a classic case of we lost the battle, but won the stationery. With paper came the democratization of knowledge. Suddenly, information could be copied and shared far more easily than the old, labor-intensive parchment and papyrus. It was the Middle Ages version of going viral, with manuscripts spreading across the Islamic world faster than a modern-day meme. It's no wonder that Baghdad became the intellectual capital of the world. When you've got the medieval equivalent of a Xerox machine, the possibilities are endless. This paper revolution also had economic implications. The burgeoning book market created a whole new class of scribes, copyists, and booksellers who turned the written word into a thriving industry. The costs dropped, literacy spread, and suddenly everyone and their neighbor could get their hands on the latest treatise on astrology or a gripping tale from the Arabian Nights. It was an intellectual renaissance, fueled by the simple act of putting words on a page. Meanwhile, life in the Abbasid Caliphate wasn't all about books and banquets. The social fabric was a complex tapestry of roles and responsibilities, with women threading their own unique paths through the layers of society. Now, it's easy to romanticize the past as a time when women wore veils and little else was expected of them. But that's a myth that needs busting faster than you can say gender norms. Women in the Abbasid period were not just silent figures in the background. They were active participants in cultural and economic life. They managed households, ran businesses, and even wielded influence in political circles. Some women, like Al-Khayzuran, the mother of Caliph Harun al-Rashid, were power brokers in their own right, navigating the treacherous waters of court politics with more finesse than a seasoned diplomat. Al-Khayzuran wasn't just a mother. She was a strategist, a negotiator, and a formidable force in her son's administration. Of course, not every woman in the Abbasid world was playing political chess. The average woman's life was a collage of domestic duties, child-rearing, and community involvement. But even within these constraints, there was room for agency and influence. In the bustling markets of Baghdad and beyond, women were traders, artisans, and entrepreneurs. They participated in a vibrant economy where haggling was an art form and the price of goods could make or break a day's earnings. Yet, it wasn't all sunshine and dirhams. The Abbasid era, like any other, was rife with inequalities, and the gap between the privileged and the plebeians was as obvious as the caliph's golden throne. While the affluent enjoyed the sweet life, literally, with their penchant for honeyed desserts, the urban poor and rural peasants faced the gritty reality of survival. For many, life was a balancing act between opportunity and adversity, where access to resources could mean the difference between comfort and hardship. And then there were the cultural pressures to contend with. In a society that valued learning and piety, there was a constant push and pull between worldly pleasures and spiritual devotion. Think of it as the age-old struggle between hitting the books or hitting the town. The Abbasids, with their love of knowledge and luxury, often found themselves walking this tightrope, juggling the demands of faith with the allure of the material world. But let's not forget that even in this rich tapestry, there were threads that didn't quite fit the pattern. The Abbasid world, like any other, had its share of outliers and eccentrics, from poets who pushed the boundaries of propriety to philosophers who questioned the very foundations of existence. The Caliphate was a place where ideas flowed as freely as the Tigris. It was a world where innovation and tradition collided, creating sparks that lit up the pages of history. Yet, for all its intellectual brilliance and cultural vibrancy, the Abbasid Caliphate was still very much a product of its time. Life was unpredictable, disease was rampant, and the political landscape could shift with the speed of a desert wind. The Abbasids were masters of diplomacy and strategy, but they were also human, subject to the same whims and caprices that have plagued rulers throughout the ages. In this world of contrasts, the Abbasids forged a legacy that was as multifaceted as it was enduring. They navigated the complexities of empire with a deftness that would make modern politicians envious, all while fostering an environment where knowledge was revered and culture flourished. And as we continue to unravel their story, we'll see just how these ancient architects of civilization laid the groundwork for the world we know today. But hold that thought, because there are more stories to tell, and the Abbasid tapestry is far from unwoven. As we delve deeper into the Abbasid saga, let's crank up the drama dial to 11. The power struggles of the Abbasid Caliphate were so intense they could make your favorite TV political series look like a daytime soap. We're talking about a world where loyalty was as fragile as a sandcastle at high tide, and betrayal was practically a family tradition. Forget keeping up with the Joneses. In the Abbasid family, it was more like keeping up with who might stab you in the back next. Take the story of Caliph Al-Mansur, for instance. Installed as the second Abbasid Caliph in 754 CE, he wasn't exactly a poster child for peace and harmony. His rise to power wasn't a smooth ascension. It was more like a climb up a greased pole, with plenty of rivals trying to yank him down. Al-Mansur's reign was marked by paranoia and political purges that would make even the most Machiavellian ruler raise an eyebrow. He faced numerous revolts, including the infamous Shia rebellion led by Muhammad al-Nafs al-Zakiyah in 762 CE, which was quashed with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Now, if you're wondering why Al-Mansur was jumping at shadows, you might want to check out the family dynamics at play. The Abbasids didn't just have enemies outside their ranks. They were adept at manufacturing them within. The caliph's closest allies could turn into his fiercest adversaries faster than you can say dynastic intrigue. In a world where the only thing more lethal than a rival's dagger was a cousin's ambition, trust was a rare commodity. But let's not give Al-Mansur a bad rap without acknowledging his accomplishments. Under his rule, the Abbasids solidified their power base and expanded their empire, stretching their borders from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the Indus River in the east. It was a time of consolidation and expansion, albeit one where the oops moments in military campaigns were as frequent as the victories. Take the Battle of Talas in 751 CE, for instance, a skirmish that saw Abbasid forces clash with the Tang dynasty of China. While the Abbasids managed to halt the Chinese advance, the real winner was paper, as we previously noted. But military prowess wasn't just about victories on the battlefield. It was also about keeping the home front stable. And to do that, the Abbasids often relied on a mix of diplomacy and, shall we say, creative problem-solving. When diplomacy failed, a well-placed dagger could resolve disputes with a finality that even the most eloquent treaty couldn't match. It may not have been pretty, but it was effective, or at least that was the theory. Speaking of creative solutions, let's not forget the role of the vizier. In the Abbasid court, vizier was the caliph's right-hand man, the power behind the throne, and often the first to take the fall if things went sideways. One of the most famous viziers was the legendary Yahya ibn Khalid, who served under Caliph Harun al-Rashid. Yahya wasn't just a bureaucrat. He was a master of political chess, navigating the treacherous waters of court intrigue with the grace of a ballet dancer and the cunning of a seasoned fox. But even Yahya's savvy couldn't protect him forever. In 803 CE, he and his family were purged in a move that was as much about eliminating rivals as it was about consolidating power. It was a classic case of the court's revolving door policy, where allies today could become enemies tomorrow, and no one was safe from the capricious whims of the caliph. As the Abbasids tightened their grip on power, they also faced the growing challenge of governing an increasingly diverse and sprawling empire. The further their reach extended, the more difficult it became to maintain control. Think of it as trying to juggle flaming torches while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. One slip, and everything could come crashing down. And crash it did, on more than one occasion. The Abbasids faced numerous revolts and uprisings, each one threatening to unravel the carefully woven fabric of their empire. From the Zanj rebellion in the 9th century, led by enslaved East Africans in southern Iraq, to the Karmatian uprising in Bahrain, these revolts were stark reminders of the underlying tensions that simmered beneath the surface. The Zanj rebellion, which lasted from 869 to 883 CE, was particularly brutal, with the rebels managing to capture the city of Basra and hold it for over a decade before being defeated. In the face of these challenges, the Abbasids had to get creative. They couldn't just rely on brute force. They needed a deft touch, a diplomatic finesse that could soothe simmering tensions without sparking new fires. It was a high-wire act, balancing the demands of governance with the realities of rebellion, and it required a deft touch that wasn't always in ready supply. Yet, for all the struggles and setbacks, the Abbasid Caliphate managed to hold on to power for centuries, a testament to their resilience and adaptability. They navigated the choppy waters of politics with a mix of cunning and charisma, always staying one step ahead of their rivals, and sometimes their own allies. But let's not romanticize the Abbasid era too much. For every tale of political intrigue and military might, there's a darker side to the story, one that often gets glossed over in the grand narratives of empire. Behind the glittering facade of the Abbasid court lay a world of shadows and secrets, where ambition and betrayal were as common as the call to prayer. In this world, conspiracy theories were as rampant as the latest fashion trend, and historical revisionism was practically a pastime. Take, for example, the tale of the Abbasid revolution itself. While the official narrative paints the Abbasids as liberators who overthrew the oppressive Umayyads, the truth is far more nuanced. Yes, the Abbasids capitalized on widespread discontent, but they were also adept at rewriting history to suit their needs, portraying themselves as saviors in a saga that was anything but simple. The Abbasid era was a time of great change and upheaval, a period where the lines between fact and fiction were often blurred. And while the stories of power struggles and political drama may be captivating, they also serve as reminders of the complexities and contradictions of human nature. In the end, the Abbasids were not just rulers of an empire. They were architects of a legacy that continues to shape our world today. So as we continue our journey through the annals of Abbasid history, let's keep in mind that the past is never as simple as it seems. It's a tapestry woven from countless threads, each one telling its own story, each one adding to the grand narrative of human civilization. And with so many stories left to tell, our exploration of the Abbasid era is far from over. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. And now, as the Abbasid Caliphate finds itself dancing on the knife edge of history, we arrive at the point where even the grandest narratives must eventually close their curtains. The year is 1258, and the Mongols are about to make an entrance that would make a rock star's stage dive look like a timid handshake. Picture the Abbasids' grand city of Baghdad, once the glittering jewel of an empire, now bracing for the kind of makeover that HGTV definitely wouldn't approve of. The Mongol invasion led by Hulagu Khan was nothing short of catastrophic. If the Abbasid Caliphate were a blockbuster movie, the Mongols were the surprise plot twist that leaves you gasping. They stormed into Baghdad with approximately 150,000 troops, a force so formidable that it seemed less like an army and more like a Godzilla-sized wrecking ball. Within a matter of days, the city that had been a beacon of culture and intellect was reduced to smoldering ruins. Libraries, brimming with centuries of accumulated knowledge, were set ablaze, and the rivers ran black with ink, an apocalyptic image that haunts history enthusiasts to this day. But let's not get too bogged down in the doom and gloom just yet. The fall of Baghdad was undoubtedly a seismic event, but it wasn't the end of the Abbasid legacy. In fact, the Mongol conquest unwittingly set the stage for a fascinating cultural exchange. While the Mongols were initially as subtle as a bull in a china shop, they eventually embraced aspects of the cultures they conquered, including Islam. Hulagu's descendants, the Ilkhanate, even converted to Islam, turning the tables on the notion of a purely destructive invasion. So, did the Abbasid Caliphate leave behind, aside from a few charred ruins, and a haunting cautionary tale about the perils of complacency? For starters, the intellectual legacy of the Abbasid era laid the groundwork for future civilizations in ways that are often underappreciated. The translation movement, spearheaded by the Abbasids, preserved and enhanced the knowledge of ancient cultures, creating a treasure trove of wisdom that was eventually transmitted to Europe. When the Renaissance scholars of the West started poking around ancient texts, it was often Arabic translations of Greek works they stumbled upon, like finding a map on a treasure hunt you didn't know you were on. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of intellectual enlightenment. The so-called Islamic Golden Age was as golden as a gilded cage, beautiful, yes, but also containing its fair share of constraints and contradictions. It wasn't a utopia where everyone sang Cumbaya while solving quadratic equations by candlelight. For one, the social hierarchy was as rigid as an overstarched collar, with the elite enjoying a life of luxury while the common folk dealt with the daily grind, much like today, but with fewer traffic jams and more camel caravans. The Abbasids' commitment to knowledge wasn't just about enlightenment for enlightenment's sake, either. It was also a tool of statecraft, a way to consolidate power and project an image of sophistication and supremacy. In a world where might often made right, the Abbasids used knowledge as their ace in the hole, ensuring their legacy would be both intellectual and imperial. The scholars of the House of Wisdom were the original influencers, shaping not just the discourse of their time, but also the trajectory of future generations. And let's not overlook the economic context that fueled this intellectual and cultural efflorescence. The Abbasid Caliphate was strategically positioned at the crossroads of major trade routes, acting as the medieval middleman between China, India, the Byzantine Empire, and beyond. This prime real estate meant that goods, ideas, and people flowed through the Caliphate like water through a sieve. The resulting wealth was both literal and metaphorical, filling coffers and libraries alike, while also highlighting the irony that the same interconnectedness that built the empire also made it vulnerable to external threats. The Caliphate's legacy also includes the arts, with architecture, literature, and music flourishing in ways that would echo through the ages. The geometric patterns and intricate designs of Abbasid architecture can still be seen today, a testament to a time when building something beautiful was as much about status as it was about spirituality. Meanwhile, the literature of the period, from the romantic escapades of 1001 Nights to the scientific treatises of Al-Farabi, underscored a society that valued both narrative and knowledge, a balance that remains elusive even in our modern age. But for all the intellectual and cultural fireworks, the Abbasid era also serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of political complacency and the brittleness of empires that appear invincible. The Caliphate's decline was not solely due to the Mongols' spectacular entrance. Long before Hulagu and his merry band of conquerors arrived, the Abbasids were already struggling with internal divisions, fiscal mismanagement, and a gradual decentralization of power that left them vulnerable to both external and internal threats. And here lies the bittersweet truth. The Abbasid Caliphate, like all great empires, was a complex tapestry woven from threads of triumph and tragedy, brilliance and brutality. Its story is not just one of cultural renaissance, but also of human fallibility, a reminder that even the most formidable powers can be undone by a combination of external forces and internal weaknesses. So, as the sun sets on our tale of the Abbasids, let's leave with a nuanced appreciation of their legacy. They were architects of an era that shaped the course of human history, building bridges of knowledge that spanned continents and centuries. Yet they were also mortal, their ambitions and achievements tempered by the same frailties and foibles that define us all. And while their empire may have crumbled, the echoes of their contributions continue to resonate, a testament to the enduring power of ideas in a world that never stops changing. As the final pages of the Abbasid saga are turned, remember that history is a mirror reflecting both the best and worst of humanity, and in its reflection, we find the stories that continue to shape our world. In the bustling heart of 5th century BC Athens, where democracy was as fresh as a newly minted drachma, Pericles was the man steering the ship, and this wasn't just any ordinary ship. It was a trireme cutting through the choppy waters of political innovation, cultural brilliance, and let's face it, a fair share of Athenian drama. This was a time when the city-state was all about trying new things, like giving power to the people instead of just a handful of aristocrats. Talk about risky business. Pericles, the son of Xanthippus, was born into an aristocratic family around 495 BC, but don't let the silver spoon fool you. He wasn't your typical elite, lounging around in a toga all day. Nope, he had big plans for Athens, and he wasn't about to let his cushy background hold him back. The stage was set before he even entered the scene, thanks to some heavy hitters like Cleisthenes, who had already started the democratic ball rolling. Imagine the political landscape as a game of musical chairs, except with fewer chairs and more people trying to squeeze in. Cleisthenes had reformed the Athenian political system around 508 BC, introducing a brand new assembly where citizens could have their say. But he left the door wide open for Pericles to take it to the next level. Now, Athens wasn't just about politics. This city had a flair for the dramatic, in every sense of the word. The Athenians were theater enthusiasts, and Pericles knew how to work both the political stage and the literal one. I mean, who could resist the lure of a good tragedy or comedy? The Greeks practically invented binge-watching, except their entertainment was live and possibly involved a goat sacrifice or two. The theater was where ideas were tossed around like olives in a salad, and Pericles was the chef adding the perfect dressing. He knew how to captivate an audience, whether it was in the assembly or at the Dionysian festivals. And let's not forget, in 472 BC, he even funded a production of Aeschylus, the Persians. Talk about a guy who knew how to pick a hit. But back to the serious stuff. Pericles inherited a city on the brink of transformation. The groundwork had been laid with Cleisthenes' reforms, dividing the population into 10 tribes, each contributing members to the new council of 500. It was a bit like drafting a fantasy football team with real stakes involved. This was a move to dilute the power of the aristocratic families and give the average Joe, or in this case, the average demos, a voice. And while this was all well and good, it was just the appetizer. Pericles was ready to serve the main course. When he started to rise in prominence around 461 BC, Pericles had a vision. He wanted to create a society where being an active citizen wasn't just a duty, but a privilege. He pushed for reforms that would pay jurors for their service, ensuring that even the poorest could participate in civic duties without losing their livelihood. It was like offering free snacks to get people to show up to a meeting. Simple, yet effective. And let's not forget, he was the guy who really beefed up the power of the Athenian assembly, making it the central hub for decision-making. This was democracy on steroids. Pericles was also a master of optics. He knew that to keep the people on his side, he needed to give them something tangible. Enter the Parthenon, the piece de resistance of his building program, which kicked off in 447 BC. It wasn't just about creating a pretty skyline. It was about showcasing Athenian superiority and ambition. The Parthenon was a symbol of the city's power and a testament to its cultural supremacy. It was also a strategic move to keep the economy humming along as the construction provided jobs and stimulated trade. Pericles was playing 4D chess while others were still figuring out checkers. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with Pericles' grand designs. There were plenty of critics who thought he was giving too much power to the masses. The old guard was clutching their pearls, aghast at the idea of commoners having a say in the running of the city. They were convinced it was only a matter of time before Athens descended into mob rule. But Pericles was nothing if not persuasive. He had a knack for turning criticism into opportunity, using his eloquence and charisma to win over skeptics. Even Thucydides, historian, not the political rival, though he was a thorn in Pericles' side too, had to acknowledge his prowess, describing him as the first citizen of Athens. Pericles was juggling more than just democracy and theater. He was also dealing with external threats. Sparta was always lurking in the background like an unwanted in-law, just waiting for Athens to slip up. And then there was the Persian Empire, still licking its wounds after the Greco-Persian Wars. The Delian League, an alliance of Greek city-states led by Athens, was supposed to keep the Persians at bay, but it was also a nifty tool for Pericles to extend Athenian influence. The League's coffers were filled with contributions from member states, and Pericles wasn't shy about dipping into them to fund his projects. It was like a political Kickstarter, with Athens reaping the benefits. In this age of innovation, debate, and let's be honest, a fair bit of chaos, Pericles stood as a beacon of what Athens could achieve. He wasn't just about lofty ideals and grand speeches. He was about making those ideals a reality. Through his reforms, he helped shape Athens into a city that valued participation, culture, and above all, the power of the people. But make no mistake, Pericles wasn't a saint or a demigod. He was a savvy politician who knew how to play the game, and he played it well. So, as we set the stage for Pericles' grand political ballet, remember that this wasn't just a story of one man. It was the tale of a city finding its voice, and a people learning the power they held. And while Pericles might have been the star, the chorus of Athenians was what made the performance truly unforgettable. Pericles wasn't just the star of the Athenian show. He was its mastermind, orchestrating a political symphony that would make even the most ambitious conductor break a sweat. His rise to power was no fluke. Think less overnight sensation, and more strategic genius with a dash of luck. Pericles knew the political stage was a minefield, and he danced through it with the grace of a seasoned performer. In the early days of his political career, around 461 BC, Pericles latched onto the cause of the demos like a barnacle to a ship's hull. This wasn't just about altruism, it was smart politics. By aligning himself with the common people, he not only strengthened his base, but also weakened the aristocratic grip on power. He was like a master chess player, always thinking 3 moves ahead, making alliances and shifting pieces to suit his grand design. Pericles' support for jury pay was a game changer. Before his reforms, serving in the judiciary was a rich man's game. After all, who else could afford to leave their fields or sharps unattended? But Pericles, ever the populist, turned the tables by introducing a stipend for jurors. This wasn't just a salary, it was a ticket to participation for every Tom, Dick, and Demosthenes in Athens. It was as if he'd handed the keys to democracy directly to the people. And let's not kid ourselves, it was a brilliant move to secure their loyalty. Suddenly, civic duty came with financial perks, and if there's one thing that gets people off their couches, it's the promise of a little extra coin. And while we're on the subject of coin, let's talk about Pericles' public works projects. The Parthenon wasn't just a temple, it was a jobs program wrapped in marble glory. Starting in 447 BC, this architectural marvel employed thousands, from stonemasons to sculptors, effectively turning Athens into a bustling hive of economic activity. It was like the ultimate government stimulus package, ensuring that both the glory of the gods and the prosperity of the people were served. But here's where our story takes a twist. Athens was a city of contradictions, and Pericles was its most enigmatic figure. While he was busy championing democracy at home, Athens was flexing its imperial muscles abroad. The Delian League, originally a defense alliance, had morphed into an Athenian empire in everything but name. Member states found themselves more like tributaries, paying for the privilege of Athenian protection, or more accurately, Athenian domination. It was democracy on one hand, imperial ambition on the other, a paradox that would make even the most seasoned spin doctor blush. Pericles understood that to maintain his power, he needed the people on his side. He was a maestro of public opinion, knowing when to strike the right chord of populism and when to pull back. His reforms and building projects weren't just about lofty ideals. They were practical solutions to keep Athens' economy humming and its citizens content. It was a delicate balancing act, like walking a tightrope over a pit of hungry Spartans. One misstep, and it could all come crashing down. Yet, even as Pericles was crafting a legacy that would echo through the ages, he was also unwittingly sowing the seeds of future discord. The very reforms that democratized Athens also opened the door for demagoguery, as future leaders would learn to manipulate the system for personal gain. It was a classic case of unintended consequences, a theme as old as history itself. Still, Pericles' Athens was a beacon of cultural and political innovation, a city where ideas flowed as freely as the wine at a symposium. It was a place where the arts flourished, where philosophers like Socrates could roam the streets questioning everything. And if some of those questions poked a little too closely at the contradictions of Athenian life, well, that was part of the charm. In the end, Pericles was more than just a leader. He was a visionary who understood the power of image and the importance of legacy. He knew that to secure his place in history, he needed to leave behind something tangible, something that would endure long after the echoes of his speeches had faded. The Parthenon stands to this day, a testament to his audacity and ambition. As we delve deeper into Pericles' world, remember that the story of Athens is one of both triumph and hubris. It's a reminder that great achievements often come with great costs, and that the line between democracy and empire can be as thin as a sheet of papyrus. Pericles walked that line with skill and finesse, but even he couldn't foresee the full consequences of his actions. So, As we continue to unravel the tale of Pericles and his city, keep in mind that history is never just black and white. It's a tapestry of complexities, woven together by the choices of those who dared to dream big and act boldly. And few dreamed bigger or acted with more daring than Pericles. But the story doesn't end here. There's much more to uncover about the man who helped shape a city and, in turn, a world. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. As we keep unraveling the tale of Pericles, the maestro of ancient Athens, let's dive into the golden glow of his era, a time when Athens wasn't just a city, it was the cultural capital of the Greek world. Picture this. Around 450 BC, Athens was in full bloom with art, philosophy, and democracy flourishing like wildflowers in a spring meadow. This wasn't just happenstance. It was carefully orchestrated by Pericles, who was part politician, part visionary, and part, let's be honest, showman with a penchant for speechifying and a helmet hair that would make even the finest Corinthian bronze envious. The Delian League's treasury was Pericles' secret weapon in this cultural arms race. Originally intended as a collective defense fund to keep the pesky Persians at bay, the treasury had become Athens' personal piggy bank, relocated from Delos to Athens in 454 BC. Now, with Athens as its financial hub, the city had the means to fund an unprecedented building spree. The Parthenon, the Odeon, and the Propylaea were just some of the architectural masterpieces that sprouted up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. It was as if the gods themselves were playing Sim City, and Pericles was their avatar, clicking away to create a skyline that would make even Zeus nod in approval. But here's where the plot thickens. While the city's marble glow was undeniable, the question of who truly benefited from this prosperity loomed like a shadow over the Acropolis. Sure, the grand construction projects provided jobs and boosted the local economy. Stonemasons, artisans, and laborers found work in abundance, transforming Athens into a bustling hive of activity. Yet, for many Athenians, the glittering facade of prosperity was just that, a facade. The wealth generated from these projects didn't trickle down as much as it pooled around the elite's toga-clad feet. The economic divide between the haves and the have-nots was as stark as the difference between a fine chiton and a threadbare tunic. Pericles, ever the political chess master, understood the importance of keeping the masses engaged, or at least entertained. His solution, a cultural explosion that would make Athens the envy of the ancient world. Under his watch, the arts flourished like never before. Theatres were packed with Athenians eager to watch the latest plays by Sophocles and Euripides. Philosophers like Socrates roamed the agora, questioning everything from the nature of justice to why anyone would choose a helmet over a stylish hairdo. The Panathenaic Festival, an event so grand it could rival the Olympic Games, became a celebration of Athenian identity and unity. Yet Pericles was no fool. He knew that cultural prestige alone wouldn't keep him in power. His real genius lay in his ability to wield rhetoric like a master sculptor wields a chisel. His speeches were legendary, not just for their length, but for their ability to sway public opinion. Thucydides, the historian, not the rival, once remarked that Pericles carried the state with his single voice, and he wasn't exaggerating. Whether it was rallying the people during the Peloponnesian War or justifying the use of the Delian League's funds, Pericles spoke with a mix of charisma and authority that could make even the staunchest opponents reconsider their stance. Of course, not everyone was enamored with Pericles' oratory prowess. His long-winded speeches became the stuff of legend, with some claiming he could talk the ears off a donkey. And let's not forget his infamous helmet hair, a style choice so distinct it practically became a trademark. Whether it was a practical attempt to keep his larks in place during windy speeches or a fashion statement, we may never know, but it certainly added to his aura of larger-than-life leadership. Behind the scenes, Pericles was a maestro of alliances, both political and personal. He knew that to maintain his grip on power, he needed the support of key figures and factions within Athens. His alliances with influential families and leaders were as carefully crafted as the friezes on the Parthenon. He married into the Alcmaeonid family, aligning himself with one of Athens' most powerful clans. It was a shrewd move that bolstered his political capital and ensured that his policies found support in the assembly. But let's not sugarcoat it. Pericles' Athens was a city of contradictions. While democracy flourished at home, Athens was flexing its imperial muscles abroad. The Delian League had become less a coalition of equals and more an Athenian empire in all but name. Member states were expected to pay tribute, often begrudgingly, to fund Athens' grand ambitions. It was a delicate balancing act, with Pericles walking a tightrope between democratic ideals and imperial realities. So, as we continue to explore Pericles' world, remember that the glittering facade of Athens' golden age was underpinned by complexities and contradictions. It was a time of great achievements and significant inequalities, of cultural triumphs and imperial overreach. Pericles, with his strategic brilliance and unmatched charisma, was at the center of it all, orchestrating a symphony of politics, culture, and power that would echo through history. Yet, even as he built a legacy that would endure for centuries, he was sowing the seeds of future discord, a theme we'll unravel as we delve deeper into his fascinating story. Yet, as Athens basked in the golden glow of its cultural and architectural renaissance, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, ready to rain on Pericles' parade. The Peloponnesian War, a conflict that would make even the most hardened strategos reach for the ouzo, was looming large. This was Sparta's not-so-subtle way of saying, "We've had enough of your Athenian swagger." It was time for Pericles to flex his strategic muscles, but not all his moves would win him gold stars in the annals of history. Let's set the scene. The year is 431 BC, and Athens and Sparta are locked in a bitter rivalry that makes the Hatfields and McCoys look like a friendly neighborhood dispute. Sparta, with its disciplined hoplites and a military culture that could put even the toughest gym class to shame, was not impressed by Athens' cultural posturing. The two city-states had been circling each other like wary cats for years, their tensions simmering just below the surface. This was a classic case of when two alpha cities collide, and the stakes were as high as the Acropolis. Pericles, ever the visionary, had a plan. His strategy was simple: avoid land battles with Sparta's formidable army, and instead rely on Athens' superior naval power. Athens was the proud owner of the finest fleet in the Greek world, and Pericles intended to use it to his advantage. The idea was to harass the Peloponnesian coast and use Athenian walls to protect the city from Spartan assault. Think of it as a maritime form of keep-away, with triremes playing the role of agile quarterbacks. This approach, known as the Periclean strategy, was meant to show Sparta that Athens would not be easily cowed. On paper, it was a cunning plan. In practice, well, it was a bit like juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. The Athenian population was told to abandon their farms and retreat within the city walls, transforming Athens into a densely packed urban beehive. This was a logistical nightmare, with tens of thousands of people crammed together like sardines in an amphora. Food supplies had to be shipped in by sea, and as you might guess, a city that chock-full of citizens quickly became a breeding ground for all sorts of unpleasantness. And then, as if the gods themselves decided to turn up the drama, the plague hit Athens like a bolt from Zeus. In 430 BC, a mysterious disease swept through the city, killing a third of the population, including Pericles himself. The plague was a game-changer, striking with the indiscriminate fury of an ancient Thanos snap. Historians have debated the exact nature of the disease. Was it typhus, smallpox, or something else entirely? Whatever it was, it decimated Athens' population faster than you can say, "Pass the hemlock." The social and political fabric of Athens began to unravel. The city was rife with panic, chaos, and a sense of impending doom that would make even the most optimistic oracle take a long sip of wine. Pericles, the man with the plan, watched helplessly as his city succumbed to the ravages of disease. It was a tragic irony that the leader who had fortified Athens with stone walls couldn't protect it from an invisible enemy. With the plague came a crisis of leadership. Pericles, the steady hand at the helm, was gone, and Athens found itself adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Without his charismatic guidance, the assembly became a cacophony of competing voices, each one more desperate than the last to steer Athens away from the brink. The political scene turned into a veritable circus, with demagogues emerging to fill the vacuum left by Pericles. These new leaders often prioritized personal ambition over the city's well-being, a stark contrast to Pericles' more statesmanlike approach. Meanwhile, the war with Sparta dragged on like an endless tragedy. with neither side able to land a decisive blow. The conflict stretched on for nearly 3 decades, draining Athens of its resources and resilience. The Athenian Empire, once the envy of the Greek world, began to crumble under the weight of war and internal strife. The Delian League, which had once been a symbol of Athenian hegemony, now seemed like a gilded cage from which there was no escape. In the end, Pericles' grand vision for Athens was both its greatest triumph and its Achilles' heel. His policies of expansion and cultural dominance had indeed made Athens a beacon of civilization, but they also sowed the seeds of its downfall. The very strengths that had elevated Athens to greatness, its democracy, its naval power, its cultural achievements, became sources of vulnerability in the face of prolonged conflict and disease. The irony of Pericles' legacy is that while he sought to build an enduring monument to Athenian greatness, his ambitions may have laid the groundwork for its decline. It's a classic tale of hubris, where the line between visionary and overreacher is as fine as a Corinthian column. Pericles, with his lofty ideals and strategic gambits, had played a high-stakes game, and while he won many battles, the war, and its lasting impact, proved less forgiving. As we leave Pericles' Athens to grapple with its own contradictions and challenges, remember that history is a tapestry woven with both triumph and tragedy. The story of Pericles is a testament to the complexities of leadership and the unpredictable nature of human events. It's a reminder that even the most brilliant minds can be undone by forces beyond their control, and that the legacy of a leader is often as much about the lessons learned as the achievements celebrated. Stay with us as we continue to explore the echoes of this fascinating era, for the story of Athens is far from over. And so, as the dust settled on Athens' tumultuous stage, we find ourselves peering through the lens of history at the legacy of Pericles, a man whose life was a masterpiece of political theater and strategic acumen. His story isn't just a cautionary tale of ambition and excess. It's a case study in leadership, the kind that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. Pericles left behind a city that was both a marvel and a cautionary tale. His reforms had indeed revolutionized Athenian democracy. Take the introduction of pay for public duties, for instance. This was no small change. It was a seismic shift that allowed even the most humble Athenian to participate in civic life. Imagine elevating a system where only the wealthy could afford to serve, to one where every citizen had a stake. It was a democratic dream, or perhaps a nightmare, depending on which side of the wealth divide you were standing. Yet, while Pericles' reforms democratized Athens, they also laid the groundwork for populism. Future leaders found they could exploit the very systems Pericles put in place, like kids discovering the cheat codes to a game. The assembly became a platform not just for democratic expression, but for demagoguery, with leaders who were more interested in popularity contests than policy. Sound familiar? Today's political landscape might have more in common with ancient Athens than we'd like to admit. Let's not forget the economic impact of Pericles' grand designs. The building projects he championed, like the Parthenon, were not just about flaunting Athenian superiority. They were economic engines. They employed thousands, boosted trade, and kept the city's coffers ringing with the sound of prosperity. But here's the rub. The prosperity wasn't exactly evenly distributed. While the elites dined on stuffed vine leaves, the common Athenian might have been left with little more than crumbs. It was a classic case of trickle-down economics, ancient style. Pericles' legacy was a double-edged sword. On one hand, he turned Athens into the shining beacon of the ancient world, a cultural powerhouse that gave us the foundations of Western philosophy, drama, and art. On the other hand, his imperial ambitions and the centralization of power within Athens came at a cost. The Delian League, once a noble alliance, became a symbol of Athenian overreach, with member states feeling more like subjects than allies. It was democracy at home, but empire abroad, and that paradox was as glaring as the midday sun. His contemporaries had mixed feelings about him, to say the least. Thucydides, the historian, painted him as a leader who could sway the masses with his eloquence, a man who carried the city with his voice alone. Yet, others saw him as an autocrat in democratic clothing, a leader whose vision sometimes bordered on hubris. Aristophanes, the playwright, often lampooned him in his comedies, highlighting the absurdities and contradictions of his rule. It's a reminder that while history remembers him as a visionary, his contemporaries weren't always so kind. And then there's the myth of Pericles, the almost demigod-like figure whose name is synonymous with Athens' golden age. It's a narrative woven with threads of romance and reality, a story that captivates and complicates in equal measure. His era was indeed a time of unprecedented cultural flowering, but it was also an era of stark inequalities and political turmoil. The reality is gritty, and the myth is alluring, but both are essential to understanding the man and his legacy. So, what can modern democracies learn from Pericles' Athens? For starters, the importance of balancing ambition with accountability. Pericles' reforms empowered the people, but they also opened the door to manipulation. It's a reminder that democracy is only as strong as the integrity of those who participate in it. The Athenian assembly was a stage for both the great and the not-so-great, a place where ideas could flourish, but also where populist rhetoric could run rampant. In today's world, where political leaders often juggle the demands of the populace with the intricacies of policy, Pericles' Athens offers a timeless lesson: the importance of balancing popularity with policy. It's a tightrope walk that requires both vision and pragmatism, and perhaps a touch of Pericles' own charisma wouldn't hurt. As we wrap up our journey through the life and times of Pericles, remember that his story is a mosaic of triumphs and tragedies, of dreams realized and dreams deferred. It's a reminder that history is never just a simple tale of heroes and villains, but a complex tapestry of human ambition, folly, and resilience. So, the next time you find yourself pondering the complexities of leadership, or the next time you encounter a politician with a penchant for grand speeches and strategic alliances, think of Pericles, the man who dared to dream big and left us with a legacy that's as instructive as it is inspiring. In a time when most of the world was still figuring out how to cook their mammoth over a campfire, the Indian subcontinent was a hot mess of kingdoms that couldn't stop bickering like reality TV stars. It was a patchwork quilt of tiny states, each ruled by ambitious kings who seemed to have taken go big or go home a bit too literally. Power was shifting faster than a squirrel on espresso, and everyone thought they were the next big thing. Spoiler alert, most weren't. Into this chaos stepped Chandragupta Maurya, a young upstart who probably had the phrase, "Why not me?" tattooed somewhere under his armor. Now, Chandragupta wasn't born with a silver spoon. Nope. He was more of a find a spoon, polish it, and then turn it into a weapon kind of guy. Born in 340 BCE, the kid had a front-row seat to the disarray of the Nanda dynasty, which was less of a dynasty and more of a dysfunctional family reunion with swords. Chandragupta's rise to power wasn't just a lucky break, it was a masterclass in strategic networking. Enter Chanakya, his mentor, who was not only a teacher, but also the original life coach. Think of him as a mix between Machiavelli and a motivational speaker with a grudge. Chanakya had a bone to pick with the Nandas, and Chandragupta was his chosen instrument. Together, they cooked up a plan that was part military genius, part political maneuvering, and part sheer audacity. By 322 BCE, Chandragupta had taken control of the Magadha region after giving the Nandas a one-way ticket to retirement. But that was just the appetizer. The real feast was the empire he was about to build, stretching from the Himalayas to the Deccan Plateau. It was like Risk, but with real stakes and much less plastic. Building an empire wasn't all grand speeches and dramatic music. There were logistics to consider, like maintaining a standing army that reportedly included 30,000 cavalry, 9,000 war elephants, and infantry that could fill a stadium. Those elephants weren't just for show either. They were the ancient equivalent of tanks, minus the fuel costs, but with a much bigger appetite for bananas. And speaking of costs, running an empire wasn't cheap. While we can't pin down exact figures, maintaining such a force would have required a treasury that could rival any dragon's hoard. Then there was the issue of communication across a sprawling territory. Forget email. The Mauryans had a postal system that relied on runners and horses to carry messages. It was the ancient version of FedEx, though probably with more detours and a higher risk of getting trampled by an elephant. This network was critical for holding the empire together, ensuring that news, good or bad, could reach the furthest corners with remarkable speed for the time. Chandragupta's rule set the stage for what would become one of the largest empires in Indian history. But let's not romanticize it too much. The Mauryan Empire wasn't just a tale of glory and elephants. It was also about high taxes, strict laws, and an administration that had its fingers in every pie. The Arthashastra, attributed to Chanakya, laid out an economic policy that would make any modern-day bureaucrat swoon. It detailed everything from trade tariffs to espionage, because in ancient India, even spies had job security. So, Chandragupta Maurya went from underdog to emperor, weaving together a quilt of territories that would have made his predecessors green with envy. But as any good storyteller knows, that's only the beginning. With the groundwork laid, we're set to dive into the era of Ashoka the Great, the emperor who would redefine what it meant to rule. Stay tuned for tales of transformation, introspection, and a pivot from warmongering to peace that would make even the most hardened conquerors question their life choices. With Chandragupta setting the stage, it's time to shuffle in Bindusara, his son, who took over the family business in 297 BCE like he was inheriting the world's most ambitious startup. If Chandragupta was the empire's founding father, Bindusara was the guy who made sure it didn't crash and burn during its awkward growth phase. The Mauryan Empire wasn't just a landmass on the map. It was a living, breathing entity with needs, ambitions, and a surprising number of elephants. Now, Bindusara wasn't exactly stepping into a cushy gig. He had a vast empire to manage, stretching from the rock-strewn terrains of present-day Afghanistan to the lush, humid valleys of Assam. We're talking about a logistical nightmare that would make even the most seasoned project manager break out in a cold sweat. But Bindusara wasn't one to back down from a challenge. He had a knack for diplomacy and a roster of colorful advisors who probably kept things interesting. Let's not sugarcoat it, though. Running an empire like this was akin to juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle, blindfolded. Bindusara expanded the empire further south, reaching into the Deccan Plateau, a feat that required not only military prowess, but also a keen understanding of local politics. He was the guy who knew how to play the long game, expanding territory with a mix of force and finesse. Speaking of finesse, let's talk about the Greeks. Enter Megasthenes, the Greek ambassador who probably felt like he'd stumbled into an ancient crossover episode of Game of Thrones and The Office. Sent by Seleucus I, founder of the Seleucid Empire, Megasthenes was tasked with keeping tabs on the Mauryan Empire, a bit like sending a cultural exchange student to Hogwarts. His accounts, full of vivid descriptions, give us a glimpse into the Mauryan court, where elephants roamed like oversized house pets and advisors whispered like they were plotting the next big cliffhanger. Megasthenes documented his experiences in a work called the Indica, which, let's be honest, sounds like a travel blog with a penchant for the dramatic. He described a land of wonders, from the mighty Ganges to markets bustling with activity that would put any modern-day bazaar to shame. But he also noted the empire's elaborate bureaucracy, with officials who could give today's tax collectors a run for their money. It was a world where spies were as common as street vendors and taxes were as inevitable as monsoon rains. But let's not gloss over the political intrigue. Bindusara's court was a hotbed of plotting and scheming that would make a soap opera seem tame. Advisors jockeyed for power, while local rulers tried to carve out their own little fiefdoms. Yet Bindusara managed to keep it all together, using a mix of charm and sheer force of will. He was like the ultimate cat herder, managing to corral his empire's diverse peoples and interests into something resembling unity, a feat that, much like getting a toddler to eat their vegetables, was easier said than done. And then there were the taxes. Oh, the taxes. Bindusara's administration was meticulous, to say the least. The tax system was as complex as a modern-day tax code, ensuring that every transaction contributed to the empire's coffers. This was a world where even the most mundane activities, like salt production or textile weaving, came with a side of bureaucratic oversight. It was a well-oiled machine, designed to keep the empire's economic engine chugging along, albeit with the occasional sputter. Yet, despite the challenges, Bindusara's reign was marked by stability and expansion. He laid the groundwork for what would eventually become a golden age under his son, Ashoka. The empire was like a giant puzzle, with each piece carefully placed to ensure the whole remained intact. And while the Mauryan Empire was far from perfect, its legacy as one of history's great empires was undeniable. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Bindusara's reign was just another chapter in the Mauryan saga, a prelude to the dramatic events that would unfold under Ashoka. The empire was on the cusp of transformation, poised to make a pivot that would redefine not just its future, but the very nature of power and conquest. So sit tight, because the story of the Mauryan Empire is far from over. There's more intrigue, drama, and evolution to come, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. As the curtain rises on the next act of the Mauryan saga, enter Ashoka, the emperor who would one day swap his sword for scripture. But before he was doling out edicts like ancient India's answer to Apra, Ashoka was more of a take no prisoners kind of guy, literally. Picture a young prince with a penchant for warfare, convinced that peace was just something you got when everyone else was too beaten down to argue. And if history has taught us anything, it's that peace by sword is a bit like trying to fix a leaky roof with a band-aid. It might hold for a minute, but you're not fooling anyone. Ashoka came to power around 268 BCE, inheriting an empire that stretched its arms across the Indian subcontinent, minus a few stubborn holdouts. Chief among these was Kalinga, a region that wasn't just minding its own business, but flaunting its independence like an underdog in a sports movie. For Ashoka, this was a red rag to a bull. Kalinga was a thriving coastal kingdom with a strategic location that made it the ancient world's version of beachfront property. You could almost hear Ashoka thinking, how hard can it be? Spoiler, harder than a diamond in a snowstorm. The Kalinga War, fought around 261 BCE, was not your average skirmish. Imagine a battlefield where over 100,000 soldiers reportedly lost their lives, and another 150,000 were displaced. A humanitarian crisis that makes today's political standoffs look like playground squabbles. The brutality of the conflict was a wake-up call to Ashoka, one that made him sit up and think, maybe there's more to life than just conquering cities and counting elephants. And that's not just poetic waxing. Ashoka himself carved his regrets into stone for posterity to see. In his rock edicts, Ashoka didn't shy away from the harsh realities of war. He described the 100,000 slain there, and how many times that number died from the aftermath. It was a confession that would make even the most hardened warlords take pause. But let's not get too misty-eyed just yet. Before his epiphany, Ashoka was as ambitious as they came, with a thirst for expansion that rivaled his grandfather Chandragupta's. The Kalinga War was his attempt to stamp his authority on the map, an act of imperial ego that backfired spectacularly. What made Ashoka's transformation all the more striking was the economic and social fallout of the war. The cost of maintaining such a vast campaign wasn't just measured in human lives. It drained the imperial coffers faster than a shopping spree at a luxury bazaar. The logistics alone were mind-boggling, with soldiers needing supplies, elephants demanding their weight in fodder, and generals requiring incentives that only gold and glory could buy. No wonder Ashoka had a change of heart. It's hard to justify war when you're hemorrhaging money and manpower. But the real kicker, the social upheaval. The Kalinga War displaced entire communities, creating a refugee crisis that sent shockwaves through the empire. When Ashoka saw the suffering firsthand, it sparked a radical pivot. It's the kind of plot twist that would make even Shakespeare raise an eyebrow, an emperor turning his back on conquest to embrace Dharma or the path of righteousness. Ashoka's shift from warrior to wise ruler wasn't just a personal transformation. It was a seismic shift in governance, an ancient rebranding that would make any PR guru nod in approval. Yet, let's not paint Ashoka as an instant saint. His conversion to Buddhism didn't happen overnight. It was more of a gradual enlightenment, like a slow simmer rather than a flash fry. And while his edicts promoted non-violence, religious tolerance, and welfare measures, they were also a calculated move to consolidate power and ensure stability across the empire. It's like the ancient world's version of winning hearts and minds, with a side of moral high ground. Ashoka's reign after Kalinga was marked by initiatives that would make any modern-day bureaucrat's heart swell with pride. He established hospitals, built roads, and planted shade trees along highways, early efforts in public welfare that echoed through the ages. His administrative system was as detailed as a Swiss watch, ensuring that his policies trickled down to the furthest reaches of his empire. And let's not forget his embrace of Buddhism, which he promoted through missions that spread the teachings as far as Greece and Egypt, turning the Mauryan Empire into a hub of cross-cultural exchange. Yet the irony of Ashoka's legacy is hard to ignore. The very war that caused so much suffering also catalyzed his transformation into one of history's most benevolent rulers. It's a classic tale of redemption that resonates through time, reminding us that even the most powerful figures can be haunted by their pasts. Ashoka's journey from bloodthirsty conqueror to enlightened ruler is a testament to the complexity of human nature, a narrative of loss and redemption that still holds lessons for us today. As we wrap up this chapter, it's clear that Ashoka's story is far from finished. His reign was a tapestry of contradictions, a blend of imperial ambition and spiritual awakening that left an indelible mark on history. And while the Kalinga War set the stage for his transformation, the real drama is yet to unfold. So keep your eyes peeled as we delve deeper into Ashoka's reign, exploring the legacy of a ruler who dared to dream beyond the battlefield. Stay tuned, because the Mauryan Empire's story is just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. With Ashoka's dramatic pivot from warmonger to peace advocate, you might think he would be content to retire to a life of meditation and the occasional lotus blossom. But no, Ashoka was just getting started. His transformation into a benevolent ruler wasn't just a personal epiphany. It was a full-blown rebranding campaign that transformed the very fabric of the Mauryan Empire. Let's dive into Ashoka's embrace of Buddhism. Think of it as his spiritual midlife crisis, except with more monasteries and fewer sports cars. Before you picture him as the Dalai Lama of ancient India, remember that Ashoka's conversion was a savvy political move as much as it was spiritual. He saw Buddhism not only as a path to personal enlightenment, but also as a useful tool for unifying his sprawling empire. By promoting Buddhist principles like nonviolence and compassion, Ashoka hoped to weave a common thread across his diverse subjects, which included everything from mountain tribes to city-dwelling merchants. But Ashoka wasn't content to simply meditate on his newfound beliefs. He was all about action. Think more get your hands dirty than sit under a tree. His social reforms were comprehensive, ambitious, and surprisingly modern. Ashoka established hospitals, built roads, and dug wells, effectively giving the empire a public infrastructure facelift. His edicts, carved into stone and placed throughout the empire, were like ancient Twitter threads, short, to the point, and accessible to the masses. These edicts outlined his policies on justice, moral conduct, and welfare, ensuring that even those in the most remote villages got the memo. Now, if you're thinking, wow, what a saint, hold your horses. Ashoka's reforms were as much about maintaining control as they were about altruism. By improving the empire's infrastructure, he boosted trade and communication, ensuring that his messages and his authority could reach the furthest frontier faster than you could say, Pax Maurya. It was a classic case of doing well by doing good, with Ashoka playing the dual role of benevolent ruler and shrewd strategist. And speaking of strategy, let's talk about Ashoka's economic policies. Running an empire isn't cheap, and Ashoka knew that better than anyone. He implemented tax reforms that were, let's say, creative in their efficiency. His administration was like a well-oiled machine, with a bureaucracy that could rival any modern-day government. Taxes were collected with precision, ensuring that the empire's coffers were always full enough to fund public works and keep the military ready, just in case any pesky neighbors got ideas. Ashoka's embrace of Buddhism also had a fascinating ripple effect on international relations. By sending out missionaries as far as Greece and Egypt, he transformed India into a spiritual hub. These missions were more than just religious outreach. They were diplomatic power plays, expanding India's influence and building alliances without the need for swords or elephants. It's like he was playing chess while everyone else was still figuring out checkers. But let's not get swept away by the romance of it all. Ashoka's reputation as a saintly figure has been polished over centuries, sometimes glossing over the more pragmatic aspects of his rule. While he promoted nonviolence, he didn't dismantle the military. Instead, he kept it as a deterrent, reminding everyone that peace was preferable but not the only option. And while his edicts preached tolerance, they were also a means to consolidate his power, ensuring that dissenters thought twice before stirring the pot. So, was Ashoka really the saint he's often portrayed as? The truth, as always, is more nuanced. He was a complex figure, a ruler who balanced compassion with control, spirituality with strategy. His legacy is a testament to the power of transformation, both personal and political, showing us that even the most hardened rulers can change their stripes, if only to find a more effective way to maintain their hold on power. As we continue our exploration of Ashoka's reign, keep in mind that the story of the Mauryan Empire is far from over. His policies laid the groundwork for a golden age, but they also set the stage for challenges that would test the empire's resilience. The legacy of Ashoka is as much about the questions it raises as the answers it provides. So, stay tuned as we delve deeper into the empire's evolution, uncovering the triumphs and tribulations that defined an era. Trust me, there's more intrigue, drama, and history to uncover, and you won't want to miss what comes next. As Ashoka's reign drew to a close, the Mauryan Empire began to wobble on its pedestal, like a top spinning just a bit too long. You see, while Ashoka was busy being the philosopher king, laying down edicts, and spreading Buddhism like ancient world's best PR campaign, the empire was quietly developing a few cracks. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of what happened after Ashoka took his final bow in 232 BCE and left the stage to his successors, who, spoiler alert, didn't quite have his flair for empire management. Here's the thing. Running an empire the size of the Mauryan wasn't just a matter of writing moralistic edicts on rocks. It required a deft hand at the wheel, especially when it came to the administration that Ashoka had so meticulously set up. With Ashoka's death, the empire faced a leadership vacuum that proved tougher to fill than a broken jar of rice. His successors, starting with his grandson Dasaratha, lacked the same blend of charisma and authority. It's like trying to run a rock band with a lead guitarist who can't quite handle the solos. Now, let's talk economics, because like it or not, money makes the empire go round. The Mauryan economy was a complex beast, reliant on agriculture, trade, and the infamous tax system that was as detailed as it was burdensome. Ashoka's welfare initiatives, while admirable, weren't exactly light on the treasury. When the coffers began to resemble a college student's bank account post-spring break, things started to look shaky. The empire had been a well-oiled machine under Ashoka, but without his guiding hand, it was like leaving a toddler to run a lemonade stand in a hurricane. Not pretty. The political climate didn't help either. The central authority that Ashoka had painstakingly nurtured began to erode. The provinces, which had been kept in line by the sheer force of Ashoka's presence, started to get that rebellious teen glint in their eyes. This decentralization accelerated after Ashoka's death as regional governors, let's call them the barons of bureaucracy, realized they had more in common with their local power bases than with the distant capital. It was like a game of political Jenga, slowly pulling out pieces until the whole structure was teetering. And then there were the neighbors. You know, those delightful borderland folks who had been eyeing the Mauryan Empire with the same intent as a cat watching a fishbowl. The Sunga dynasty, rising in the aftermath of Ashoka's lineage, saw their chance and pounced. Meanwhile, the south was stirring with its own ambitions. The Satavahanas, who were like the scrappy underdogs of the subcontinent, began to assert themselves, seeing the Maurya's decline as their opportunity to shine. So here's the cold, hard truth. The Mauryan Empire didn't implode in a single dramatic event. It was more of a slow unraveling, a death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts, if you will. Ashoka's successors failed to maintain the delicate balance of power and control that he had established. It turns out, maintaining an empire required more than just good intentions and a collection of rock inscriptions. But hey, let's not toss the baby out with the bathwater. The Maurya Empire, despite its decline, left a legacy that's as enduring as, well, Ashoka's rock edicts. For one, Ashoka's embrace of Buddhism had a profound impact, setting the stage for it to flourish across Asia. Those missionary expeditions he sent out didn't just disappear into the ether. They laid the groundwork for Buddhism to become a major world religion. Imagine that. One emperor's change of heart influencing the spiritual direction of billions. Not too shabby for a guy who started out swinging swords. Philosophically, Ashoka's reign introduced a new model of rulership that emphasized moral governance over sheer force. His edicts were like ancient TED talks, extolling the virtues of kindness, tolerance, and nonviolence. Sure, they were also a bit of a PR move, but the principles they espoused were revolutionary for the time and left an indelible mark on the concept of leadership. Fast forward to today, and you can still see echoes of the Mauryan saga in modern politics. Ashoka's model of a welfare state, with its focus on public infrastructure and social welfare, finds resonance in contemporary governance. His vision of unifying diverse cultures under a common ethos is something many nations grapple with even now. And let's not forget the enduring allure of the idea that even the most mighty can turn their swords into plowshares, a narrative that continues to inspire leaders around the globe. In the end, the tale of the Mauryan Empire is both a cautionary and inspirational saga. It's a reminder that even the grandest of empires can falter if the foundations of leadership and governance aren't maintained. Yet, it's also a story of transformation and legacy, showing us that the ripples of one leader's actions can extend far beyond their lifetime. So, as you drift off to sleep with these historical musings, ponder this. In the grand tapestry of history, every thread, no matter how small, can have a lasting impact. Sweet dreams, and may your thoughts be as epic as the Mauryan Empire itself. In a world where philosophers were more common than Wi-Fi hotspots at a hipster coffee shop, Epicurus stood out like a toga-wearing, wine-sipping rock star of ancient Greece. Born in 341 BCE on the sun-drenched island of Samos, Epicurus was the kind of kid who probably spent more time pondering the mysteries of the universe than playing with whatever ancient Greek children used as toys, perhaps tiny replicas of the Parthenon. By the time he was 18, he was off to Athens, which was about as cool as it got for a philosophy geek looking to make his mark. Now, Athens was a city buzzing with the clatter of chariots and the hum of philosophical debate. Everyone was trying to get in on the intellectual action, and Epicurus was no exception. He arrived in 306 BCE, ready to shake things up like Socrates on a double espresso. With a knack for seeing the world through a slightly off-kilter lens, he founded his own school called the Garden. And no, this wasn't some metaphorical secret garden of thought. It was an actual garden. Imagine a philosophical commune where the entry fee was a love of learning and the willingness to question everything, including the purpose of existence itself. Epicurus had a flair for the unconventional, and it reflected in the way he ran his school. The Garden wasn't some ivory tower of elitist thinking. Forget the stuffy lecture halls and dusty scrolls. This was philosophy in 3D, complete with debates that probably got so loud they drowned out the sound of goats bleeding in the background. The Garden was open to everyone who shared Epicurus's vision, a radical notion at a time when most intellectual circles were as exclusive as a modern-day celebrity wedding. Women, slaves, and foreigners were all welcome, provided they could handle the verbal sparring and occasionally a bit of wine-fueled philosophical banter. And banter there was. You see, Epicurus's teachings were the ancient equivalent of a YouTube playlist on mindfulness, with a dash of hedonism thrown in for good measure. He preached that pleasure was the ultimate good, but not in a let's party like it's 399 BCE way. No, Epicurus was all about the simple pleasures, a loaf of bread, a glass of water, and a thoughtful conversation under the stars. Think minimalist, not maximalist, with an emphasis on tranquility and freedom from fear. This idea of pleasure was about as far from the stereotypical toga party as you could get, though you'd be forgiven for thinking otherwise given how people tend to associate pleasure with excess. Now, let's talk about the neighbors. Setting up a school in a residential area is bound to ruffle a few feathers, especially when your curriculum involves the kind of animated discussions that could be mistaken for a rowdy symposium. One can imagine the complaints. Those philosophers are at it again, debating the nature of the universe at 2 in the morning. Yet, Epicurus was unfazed. He was like the ancient Greek version of that cool professor who lets you call him by his first name and encourages learning for the pure joy of it, not for grades or accolades. Epicurus's philosophy might sound like common sense now, but it was revolutionary at the time. He debunked the fear of gods by arguing that they were too busy enjoying their own divine version of Netflix to bother with human affairs. Death, in his view, was nothing to fear because it simply meant a return to the void. No consciousness, no worries. It was the ultimate no-fear mantra, long before the brand was cool. But let's not sugarcoat it. Epicureanism wasn't without its critics. The idea that pleasure was the highest good prompted more than a few raised eyebrows and whispers of hedonism. Some contemporaries missed the memo on moderation and assumed Epicurus was advocating for a life of indulgence, when in fact he was the ancient poster child for less is more. Perhaps, if he'd had a marketing team, they could have clarified that Epicurean pleasure was less about Dionysian revelry and more about a quiet evening with a good book, or scroll, in this case. In the end, Epicurus left a legacy that outlived the noise, complaints, and misunderstandings. His teachings influenced generations, from Roman philosophers like Lucretius to Renaissance thinkers, and beyond. As the founder of the garden, he planted more than seeds in the soil of Athens. He sowed ideas that would grow and flourish long after the olive trees had withered away. Epicurus might have preferred a simple life, but his impact was anything but modest. In a world that often seems loud and chaotic, his call to find pleasure in simplicity and peace in understanding continues to resonate. So next time you find yourself overthinking at 3 a.m., remember, Epicurus would probably tell you to grab a cup of tea, take a deep breath, and enjoy the stars. So, as you sip your tea under the stars, let's get back to Epicurus and his quest for a life of simplicity and peace. If you thought he was just about lounging in the sun with a slice of feeder, think again. Epicurus was onto something much deeper, something called ataraxia, or as we might say in modern terms, a state of unshakable serenity. Now, this wasn't about slapping a keep calm and carry on poster on your mental walls. No, Epicurus was advocating for a life free from the anxiety that gnaws at you like a dog with a chew toy. Ataraxia was the crown jewel of Epicurean philosophy, and it was all about maintaining a tranquil mind. The goal was to dodge the existential dread that comes from fearing things like death, divine retribution, or the possibility of your neighbor borrowing your best chisel and never returning it. Epicurus taught that by understanding the nature of the universe, spoiler alert, it's mostly atoms and void, you could rid yourself of unnecessary fears. Gods, if they existed, were living it up in their cosmic penthouses, far too preoccupied with their divine brunches to meddle in human affairs. And death, well, when you're gone, so why lose sleep over it? This was Epicurus's version of unplugging from the matrix of worry. Now, when it comes to pleasure, Epicurus wasn't suggesting we all start living like ancient Greek Kardashians. His idea of pleasure was more about the absence of pain, both physical and mental, than a never-ending bacchanal. Epicurus's pleasure principle was akin to settling into a cozy chair with a good scroll and a simple meal. He was a minimalist before Marie Kondo made it cool, advocating for a life where less is more, and the simple things bring the greatest joy. Epicurus didn't live in a philosophical bubble, either. He was very much aware of the harsh economic realities of his time. The cost of living in Athens wasn't exactly a stroll through the garden, and he understood that the pursuit of wealth often led to more problems than it solved. His teachings encouraged living within one's means, finding contentment in what you have rather than constantly yearning for more. It's the kind of advice that resonates even today, as we scroll through Instagram, bombarded by ads for things we didn't know we needed. It's time to address the elephant in the room, or rather, the toga party in the garden. The misconception that Epicureanism equates to hedonism is about as persistent as a bad haircut. But let's set the record straight. Hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure as the highest good, often conjures images of wild parties and opulent feasts. Epicurus, however, was more about the quiet joys of life. He believed that once you were free from physical pain and mental distress, you could experience true pleasure. It's a bit like realizing that the best part of a vacation isn't the exotic destination, but the serene moments you find along the way. Epicurus's philosophy was radical for its time, challenging deep-seated beliefs about pleasure, pain, and the role of the gods. It was a breath of fresh air in a world where traditional Greek values were as rigid as a marble statue. He was the ancient philosopher who dared to say, hey, maybe we don't need to sacrifice a goat to appease Zeus. Maybe we just need to chill out and enjoy a nice meal with friends. His teachings were a call to find happiness not in external possessions or divine favor, but in the contentment of a well-lived life. However, not everyone was on board with Epicurus's serenity now approach. Some contemporaries, perhaps fueled by a mix of envy and misunderstanding, painted him as a hedonistic rebel, shaking their heads at what they saw as a philosophy of indulgence. But as with many things in history, the reality was far different from the myth. Epicurus was less about overindulgence and more about balance, a concept that many of us could stand to embrace a bit more today. As we continue to unravel the layers of Epicurean philosophy, it's worth noting how his ideas have stood the test of time. Even in today's fast-paced, hyper-connected world, where stress and anxiety seem to be constant companions, Epicurus's call to find peace in simplicity and joy in knowledge remains relevant. So, as you contemplate the universe or just your next meal, remember Epicurus's wisdom. Sometimes the greatest pleasures are found in the smallest things, and true happiness lies in understanding what truly matters. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover about our toga-wearing philosopher and his garden of wisdom. Epicurus's wisdom wasn't just some abstract philosophical daydream. It was a direct response to the roller coaster reality of Hellenistic Greece, a period when life was as predictable as a cat on catnip. Picture Athens around 306 BCE, a city still recovering from Alexander the Great's whirlwind tour of conquest. The guy had spread Greek culture like it was going out of fashion, but he also left a power vacuum bigger than the one between your couch cushions. With every city-state vying for dominance and wars popping up like weeds, the political climate was about as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. Epicurus strolled into this chaos like a Zen master at a marsh pit. His teachings were a salve for the soul-weary Athenians who'd seen their share of battles and betrayals. The city was a swirling mix of old-school democracy, which was more exclusive club than everyone gets a vote, and the burgeoning influence of Macedonian power. The landscape was so politically charged, you could almost taste the tension in the air, probably why everyone was washing it down with copious amounts of wine. Economically, Athens was a mixed bag. The city still boasted impressive wealth, but it was unevenly spread, like trying to butter a huge slice of sourdough with a teaspoon of margarine. The rich were getting richer, and everyone else was just trying to keep up. For the average Athenian, daily life involved a delicate dance between maintaining a livelihood and avoiding the pitfalls of political intrigue. This was a world where you could lose your fortune faster than you could say, Socrates drank what? Epicurus's philosophy offered a retreat from this instability. He wasn't peddling escapism. Rather, he was advocating for a mental fortress against the chaos. His focus on personal contentment and the pursuit of simple pleasures was like a beacon for those weary of the endless cycle of political drama. And let's face it, with Athens's penchant for coups and uprisings, it was probably a welcome relief. But here's the kicker. Epicurus's teachings, while revolutionary, were also seen as a threat. The idea of prioritizing personal happiness over civic duty was as subversive as suggesting that maybe, just maybe, the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. This was a time when public service was the gold standard of virtue. Citizens were expected to engage in political life, whether they liked it or not. The very notion that one might find fulfillment in the private sphere was akin to saying you preferred reading a book over attending the latest gladiator match. Scandalous. As the political landscape shifted, so did the cultural one. The emphasis on public life that had characterized classical Athens was giving way to a more introspective focus. People were turning inward, seeking solace in personal relationships and private contemplation rather than in the civic arena. Epicurus was tapping into this cultural shift, offering a philosophy that resonated with a populace tired of the constant power struggles. In a world where public life could be as treacherous as a Spartan boot camp, his message of tranquility was like a refreshing breeze on a sweltering Athenian afternoon. And let's not forget the wars. Oh, the wars. The Hellenistic period was a veritable buffet of conflicts, with battles breaking out like acne on a teenager. The Diadochi, those charming successors of Alexander, were locked in a perpetual game of risk, each trying to carve out their own piece of the empire. For the average Greek, this meant living in a perpetual state of uncertainty. Would today's news bring word of a new ruler, a new war, or perhaps just a new tax? It was as thrilling as it was exhausting. Epicurus's philosophy, with its emphasis on ataraxia, was a balm for these troubled times. He was like the ancient Greek version of a mindfulness guru, teaching people to find peace within themselves amidst the external chaos. His call to focus on the here and now, to find joy in the simple act of living, was a radical departure from the traditional Greek focus on glory and honor. It was about as countercultural as you could get without darning a toga made of hemp. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, its radical nature, Epicureanism struck a chord. It offered a way to navigate the treacherous waters of Hellenistic life, a guide to finding stability in an unstable world. In a time when the future was as unpredictable as a Greek tragedy, Epicurus's philosophy provided a roadmap to personal peace, a path that diverged from the well-trodden roads of political ambition and public acclaim. So, while your average Athenian might have been dodging the metaphorical arrows of political upheaval, Epicurus was there, quietly reminding them that the greatest battles were often fought within. His legacy, much like the olive trees that dotted the Athenian landscape, took root and flourished, offering shade and solace to those seeking refuge from the storm. As we continue to explore Epicurus's impact on his world, remember that his teachings were more than just philosophical musings. They were a lifeline for those navigating the choppy seas of Hellenistic Greece, a beacon of hope in a world that was anything but serene. As we wade through the labyrinth of Epicurus's life, let's tackle the myths and tall tales that have clung to him like barnacles on a ship's hull. First up, the legendary tale of his death, supposedly brought on by a kidney stone. Now, the idea of a philosopher being felled by something as small yet agonizing as a kidney stone might seem absurdly poetic. But let's sift through the rubble of history to find the truth. Epicurus died in 270 BCE at the ripe age of 72, a considerable feat for someone in ancient Greece, where life expectancy was akin to a coin toss. The story goes that he succumbed to a kidney stone, a condition that, if you've ever had the misfortune to experience, feels like trying to pass a jagged boulder through a garden hose. While this tale paints a vivid picture, it's worth noting that accounts of his death are largely based on sources long after his demise. Skeptical minds might say that blaming a kidney stone was a convenient narrative for an era that loved a bit of dramatic flair. Speaking of flair, let's address the scandalous rumors that Epicurus and his garden were nothing more than a toga-clad version of a modern-day frat house. Critics accused him of advocating for hedonistic excess, envisioning wild parties where wine flowed like the Nile in flood season. However, this image is about as accurate as calling a library a nightclub. Epicurus's idea of pleasure was more Zen retreat than Dionysian rave. He championed moderation, advocating for simple, fulfilling pleasures. Think a humble meal and a good chat, not a bacchanalia of excess. So why the rumors? Well, Epicurus wasn't just challenging philosophical norms. He was shaking societal ones too. By welcoming women, slaves, and foreigners into the garden, he was essentially flipping the bird to the elitist status quo. Such inclusivity was bound to ruffle a few feathers among the more conservative circles, who found it easier to dismiss his philosophy as debauchery than to confront their own biases. It's the age-old story. When you can't win on merit, attack the character. Now, here's the fun bit about myths. They often reveal more about the storytellers than the subjects. The image of Epicurus as a decadent hedonist served a dual purpose. It discredited his philosophy while making for a juicy tale. After all, who doesn't love a story where the supposed wise man is secretly living it up? But the truth is, Epicurus's lifestyle was as far removed from a hedonistic romp as you could get. He lived modestly, valuing tranquility over tumult, simplicity over extravagance. Let's shift our gaze to the economic realities of the time, a backdrop often overlooked in favor of more colorful gossip. Athens, after all, was a city in flux. Post-Alexander, it was trying to regain its footing like a toddler on roller skates. The cost of living was high, and the divide between the wealthy and the rest was as wide as the Aegean Sea. Epicurus's teachings, with their focus on self-sufficiency and minimalism, were not just philosophical musings, but practical advice for navigating the economic minefield of Hellenistic Greece. His philosophy was a roadmap to contentment in a world where financial stability was as elusive as a Greek hero's Cleos. Epicurus encouraged his followers to focus on inner wealth rather than outward displays of opulence. In a society that often equated wealth with virtue, this was revolutionary. His message was clear. True happiness doesn't come from the size of your purse, but from the peace of your mind. It's a sentiment that resonates even today, in our world of consumerism and social media envy, where the quest for material wealth often overshadows the pursuit of genuine contentment. Of course, not everyone was buying what Epicurus was selling. Some detractors, perhaps motivated by envy or misunderstanding, painted him as a self-indulgent recluse. In reality, Epicurus was more akin to a sage of serenity, promoting a life of balance and reflection. He wasn't advocating for the rejection of society, but rather for a recalibration of priorities, a shift from the external to the internal, from the transient to the enduring. As we untangle the web of myths surrounding Epicurus, it's crucial to understand how his legacy was shaped by both admirers and detractors. Admirers saw him as a beacon of wisdom, a philosopher who offered a lifeline in turbulent times. Detractors, on the other hand, saw a threat to traditional values, an iconoclast who dared to question the status quo. This dichotomy is as old as time itself. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a polarizing social media influencer. Epicurus's philosophy, with its emphasis on personal tranquility and the pursuit of simple pleasures, was a breath of fresh air in a world that often felt suffocating. It challenged the notion that value lay in external achievements and public acclaim, suggesting instead that true fulfillment came from within. This was not just a philosophical stance, but a radical act of defiance against a society that equated worth with wealth and status. In the end, the myths surrounding Epicurus tell us as much about the era in which he lived as they do about the man himself. They reveal a society grappling with change, caught between the pull of tradition and the push of new ideas. Epicurus stood at the crossroads of this cultural shift, offering a philosophy that was both a reflection of its time and a challenge to it. So, as we continue our journey through the life and legacy of Epicurus, remember that myths, while captivating, often obscure the more profound truths. They are the shadows on the cave wall, tantalizing yet elusive. It is through the careful examination of history that we find the light, the real story of a philosopher who dared to seek peace in a world of chaos, to find joy in simplicity, and to offer a vision of happiness that transcends time. Stay with us as we delve deeper into the legacy of Epicurus, exploring how his teachings have echoed through the ages, shaping philosophies and challenging conventions. There's more to discover, and the journey is just getting started. Epicurus's philosophy is like a vintage wine. Its appeal has only matured with time, even if some folks still get the bouquet wrong. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and his teachings have seeped into the very fabric of Western thought, influencing everything from the cerebral salons of the Enlightenment to the glossy pages of today's self-help bestsellers. It's as if Epicurus was the original life coach, minus the TikTok account and the exorbitant fees. Let's start with the Enlightenment, that intellectual rave of the 17th and 18th centuries, where thinkers like John Locke and Voltaire were having a philosophical jam session. These guys were all about reason, progress, and the pursuit of happiness, a concept Epicurus would have toasted to with a modest glass of Chianti. Enlightenment philosophers dug into Epicurean ideas like a scholar at a free buffet, celebrating his rejection of superstition and his emphasis on empirical observation. Voltaire, for instance, practically put Epicurus on a pedestal for daring to separate the divine from the mundane, suggesting that humans can find happiness without divine intervention. It's a bit like saying you don't need a GPS to find the nearest Starbucks, liberating and slightly rebellious. Let's not sugarcoat it. Epicureanism did hit a few speed bumps along its philosophical journey. In the Middle Ages, Epicurus got a bad rap, with some religious scholars denouncing his ideas as heretical. To them, the notion that gods might not be micromanaging human affairs was as scandalous as suggesting that dragons didn't exist. Yet, as the Renaissance dawned, casting its light on the dusty scrolls of antiquity, Epicureanism experienced a revival. Suddenly, the idea that personal happiness could be achieved through reason and moderation became fashionable again, like bell-bottoms in the 70s. Fast forward to the modern era, where Epicurus's echoes can be heard in the wellness industry, a sector worth over $4 trillion globally. Yes, trillion, with a T. Today's self-help gurus, with their mantras of mindfulness and minimalism, are unwittingly channeling Epicurus. Consider Marie Kondo, who asks us to find joy in simplicity. She's practically Epicurus's spiritual descendant, sparking joy with a touch of ancient Greek wisdom. Or look at the minimalist movement, where less is more and clutter is the enemy. Epicurus would have nodded sagely while tidying up his own modest abode. Then there are the parallels with contemporary economic realities, with housing prices soaring and the gig economy turning job security into a nostalgic concept. Epicureanism's focus on living within one's means resonates more than ever. It's like Epicurus was the original financial advisor, warning against the perils of keeping up with the Athenian Joneses, or should we say, the Socratic Smiths. In a world where consumer debt in the United States has surpassed $14 trillion, Epicurus's advice to find contentment in what you have rather than yearning for more feels like sage counsel from a time-traveling economist. But why does Epicurus still matter today, you ask? Because his philosophy offers a counter-narrative to the relentless hustle culture we find ourselves in. In a society that glorifies busyness and equates success with material accumulation, Epicurus reminds us to pause and savor the simple things, like a well-cooked meal or a sunset that doesn't cost a dime. He challenges us to question whether the endless pursuit of more really leads to happiness, or if, perhaps, the true wealth lies in the tranquility of a life well lived. Now, Epicurus wasn't advocating for a life of asceticism. Let's not mistake his teachings for a call to abandon all earthly pleasures and live in a cave. No, his version of pleasure was more like having your cake and eating it too, but maybe just a modest slice. His philosophy was about finding balance, recognizing that true pleasure comes from reducing pain, both physical and mental. It's about enjoying the present moment without being shackled by the fear of future uncertainties or the chains of past regrets. His legacy, therefore, is more relevant than ever in our digital age, where anxiety and burnout are as common as cat videos on the internet. Epicurus teaches us to seek ataraxia, that elusive state of inner peace, by focusing on what genuinely matters. It's a call to unplug, to disconnect from the constant barrage of information, and to reconnect with the simple joys of life. In a world where we're often more connected to our devices than to each other, Epicurus's message is a gentle reminder to look up from our screens and appreciate the world around us. As we wrap up our journey through Epicurus's life and legacy, let's take a moment to reflect on the enduring appeal of his philosophy. It's a testament to the power of timeless wisdom that his teachings continue to resonate, offering guidance in a world that often feels overwhelming. Epicurus showed us that happiness isn't a destination, but a journey, a series of small, mindful steps toward a life of serenity and contentment. In the end, Epicurus's legacy is like that ancient olive tree in the heart of Athens, its roots deep, its branches wide, offering shade and solace to those who seek it. His philosophy is a reminder that the greatest pleasures are often the simplest ones, and that true happiness lies not in the pursuit of more, but in the appreciation of what we already have. So next time you're caught in the whirlwind of modern life, remember Epicurus's wisdom. Take a deep breath, savor the moment, and find joy in the simple act of being alive. If you had dreams of sailing the high seas in the 16th century, you're in for a rude awakening, literally. The day starts with a jolt, as you're shaken from sleep in a hammock that feels more like a swinging straitjacket than a restful bed. You peel open your eyes, only to be greeted by the dim, claustrophobic hull of a ship that smells like a stew of sweat, salt, and something suspiciously fishy. Welcome to your new home. A 90-foot-long floating barks like the Santa Maria or the Golden Hind, where the concept of personal space is as mythical as the sea serpents you hope not to encounter. Forget the romantic vision of brave explorers with wind-swept hair. You're crammed into this creaky vessel with about 50 other souls, sailors of every stripe, from the greenest cabin boy to the grizzled old salt who swears he once saw a mermaid. The ship's hierarchy is as rigid as the main mast. At the top, you've got the captain, a figure of authority who's part leader, part disciplinarian, and always a bit of a mystery. Below him, the officers, who keep the ship running and the crew in line. Then there's you, somewhere in the mess of the lower decks, maybe dreaming of promotion, or at least a day without being yelled at. The rules are strict, and for good reason. A ship can't function if everyone's doing their own thing. There's a bell that dictates the daily rhythm, ringing every half hour for the watch changes, meal times, and the all-important daily prayers. Yes, prayer time, because when you're hurtling across the ocean without GPS, a bit of divine intervention seems like a smart bet. Your morning duties kick off with a task as glamorous as scraping barnacles off the hull. Maintenance is a never-ending grind, but it's life or death out here. A rope left frayed or a sail left untended could spell disaster. And unlike today, there's no Coast Guard to call for a rescue. You roll up your sleeves and get to work, all the while trying to ignore the ever-present sway beneath your feet that makes your stomach feel like it's on a roller coaster. Oh, and let's talk about the food, shall we? The ship's fare is the stuff of nightmares, unless you happen to love salted meat and hardtack biscuits that double as dental challenges. You eat these culinary delights amidst the delightful company of rats who seem to be living their best lives aboard. Freshwater is precious, rationed out with the same care as gold. After all, you've got to make that barrel last until the next rainstorm or port. Throughout the day, you catch snippets of conversation about distant lands, somewhere beyond the endless blue horizon. You might hear tales of the riches of the East Indies or the spice-laden shores of India, stories that make the hardship seem just a little more bearable. But these aren't just tall tales. They're the lifeblood of your journey, the reason why European powers are pouring resources into expeditions like yours, hoping to outdo each other and claim a piece of the lucrative trade pie. But let's not sugarcoat it. The life of a sailor is perilous. The ocean is unpredictable, and the weather can turn from calm to catastrophic faster than you can say, batten down the hatches. And guess what? You're the one doing the battening. If a storm hits, you'll be up in the rigging, battling the elements with nothing but your wits and a prayer. There's no glamour in clinging to a rope for dear life while the ship tosses like a cork in a bathtub. And if you're thinking that the end of a hard day means kicking back with a mug of grog and a sea shanty, think again. The ship never sleeps. There's always someone on watch, ready to spot a distant sail or a lurking reef. You grab what sleep you can, knowing that tomorrow will bring more of the same. Hard work, cramped quarters, and the ever-present hope of reaching a land that promises more than just survival. So there you are, a cog in the wheel of an era that reshaped the world, one wave at a time. The age of discovery wasn't just about the glory of new lands. It was built on the backs of sailors like you, enduring the harshest conditions with little more than a compass and a star to guide you. Romantic, maybe from a distance, but up close, it's a life of grit, not glamour, a world where the only thing more uncertain than the sea is what lies beyond it. And so, as you brace yourself for another day of maritime toil, let's dive headfirst into that tantalizing topic, the sailor's breakfast. Spoiler alert, it's not pancakes and bacon. Instead, you're treated to a culinary creation that would make any modern foodie shudder. Enter hardtack, the rock-hard biscuit that could double as a makeshift weapon. This was the staple of your diet, and let's be honest, calling it bread would be a stretch. It's more like a challenge for your teeth, a kind of medieval dental exercise equipment. But hold your breath. This isn't the only delicacy on the menu. There's also salt pork, meat so heavily salted it might as well be jerky's more stubborn cousin. And if you think that sounds appetizing, just wait until you get a whiff of it. These morsels were meant to last for months, not win any Michelin stars. The salt preserved the meat, but it also left you reaching for your water ration like it was liquid gold. Speaking of which, water was precious, and scarcity was the name of the game. Freshwater barrels were guarded more fiercely than the captain's rum stash. You'd be lucky if your daily allowance was more than a pint. Now, why this Spartan spread, you ask? Well, provisioning a ship for months at sea wasn't just a logistical headache, it was an economic puzzle. A ship like the Santa Maria or the Golden Hind wasn't packed with gourmet goodies because the costs were astronomical. Provisioning a single ship could cost a small fortune, with expenses running into thousands of ducats, and that's in 16th century money. We're talking about an era where spices were worth their weight in gold, quite literally. Pepper, nutmeg, and cinnamon weren't just flavorings. They were currency. Wars were fought, and empires built over these tiny taste enhancers. So, forgive your captain for not stocking up on truffle oil. And just when you thought it couldn't get more thrilling, enter grog. This magical concoction of water and rum was the sailor's lifeline, turning meals from unbearable to merely unpleasant. It was more than just a morale booster. Grog was a practical solution to the problem of stagnant water. Alcohol kept the germs at bay. At least, That's what they told themselves as they downed it like it was the nectar of the gods. You might say they were preserving their health, one buzz at a time. But let's peel back the layers and ponder the economic forces driving this seafaring circus. At the heart of it all was the insatiable European appetite for spices and precious metals. The Portuguese and Spanish were in a race to outdo each other, fueled by tales of cities paved with gold and islands brimming with cloves. Take the Moluccas, for example, an Indonesian archipelago that was the epicenter of the spice trade. The journey there could take over a year, but the payoff, astronomical. Nutmeg was worth more than its weight in gold, and cloves weren't far behind. These weren't just flavor enhancers, they were the fuel of empires. And let's not forget the economic pressures back home. Monarchs like Spain's Ferdinand and Isabella weren't bankrolling these expeditions out of the goodness of their hearts. They had a stake in the game, hoping to fill their coffers with exotic riches and outmaneuver their European rivals. For every Columbus or Magellan, there were countless sailors who bore the brunt of these imperial ambitions, enduring grueling conditions in the hope of a payday that might never come. Now, if you're picturing treasure chests overflowing with gold doubloons, let's slam the brakes on that myth. Sure, there were riches to be found, but the reality was often far less glamorous. Many ships returned with holds filled not with gold, but with spices or other trade goods that had to be carefully sold back in Europe. The voyages were a gamble, and for every successful expedition, there were countless failures. Ships sank, storms destroyed fleets, and mutinies turned dreams into nightmares. You were more likely to end up with a scurvy-riddled crew than a chest of jewels. So, as you gnaw on your morning hardtack and swig your grog, remember, the age of discovery was less about endless feasts and more about scraping by on dreams and desperation. The promise of wealth was ever distant, a mirage shimmering on the horizon. And yet, despite the hardships, the allure of adventure and the promise of riches kept the ships setting sail, one wave at a time. As the ship creaks forward on the ocean's vast blue stage, you find yourself drawn to the mysterious world of navigation, a domain where the difference between triumph and tragedy was often as fine as a hairline crack in a compass. Strap in, because in the age of discovery, you didn't have Google Maps or Siri chirping directions. Instead, you had an astrolabe, a compass, and a map that might as well have been drawn by a toddler with a crayon. The astrolabe, a medieval gadget that looks like something a wizard might use to conjure spells, was actually the cutting-edge tech of its day. Mariners used it to measure the altitude of the sun or stars to pinpoint their latitude, assuming the weather cooperated and they could actually see the sky. It wasn't exactly user-friendly. One wrong move, and you were more likely to chart a course to nowhere than to your intended exotic locale. But hey, when you're navigating an ocean without landmarks, a celestial guess is better than nothing. Magellan himself wrote of the astrolabe's utility, albeit with the resigned tone of a man who knew its limitations. The sea is wide and the sky cloudy, yet we trust to God and the stars. Then there was the compass, the trusty sidekick in this navigational duo. It pointed north, mostly, unless it got too close to a cannon or any iron object, in which case it had about as much accuracy as a fortune-teller at a carnival. But sailors swore by it. It was their guiding light, their North Star, pun totally intended. The compass was like the ship's heartbeat, keeping everyone moving in a somewhat coherent direction. Without it, you'd be adrift, possibly sailing straight off the edge of the world, at least according to some flat earth enthusiasts of the time. But let's not forget maps. Maps. In the 16th century, they were less about precision and more about optimism. Picture a sheet of parchment with coastline doodles, some dragons for flair, and a healthy dose of here-be monsters to spice things up. These maps were, in a word, adventurous. They were great conversation starters. Are we sailing to India or getting a first-class ticket to nowhere? And yet, despite their flaws, these maps held the promise of discovery. They whispered of lands unseen, riches untold, and the kind of adventure that made sailors endure months of hardtack and grueling labor. Now, slap on a layer of political intrigue, and you've got a real nail-biter. Monarchs like Spain's Ferdinand and Isabella weren't just in it for the fun of it. They bankrolled these expeditions hoping to expand their empires, outmaneuver their rivals, and let's be honest, line their coffers with gold and spices. It was a high-stakes game of risk, with real-world consequences. Navigational missteps didn't just mean a detour. They meant lost time, dwindling supplies, and possibly a very embarrassing return to port without so much as a pinch of pepper to show for it. The stakes were high, and the sea unforgiving. Take the infamous voyage of Christopher Columbus. Yes, the guy who thought he'd reached Asia when he stumbled upon the Americas. His logs reveal a harrowing tale of near mutinies and navigational blunders. Columbus noted, "The crew is restless. They growl like the sea. Yet I am certain we sailed toward Cipangu." Little did he know, Cipangu, Japan, was thousands of miles in the opposite direction. But Columbus was far from alone in his navigational follies. Ships often ventured into the unknown with nothing more than a hunch and a prayer. Vasco da Gama, on his famed voyage to India, spent 93 days crossing the open sea without sight of land, a record at the time, and not one to envy. His journey was a masterclass in endurance, both of the ship and its crew. The risks were colossal, but so were the rewards. A successful voyage could turn a mariner into a legend, a captain into a nobleman, and a monarch into a superpower. Remember, these weren't just sailing trips. They were geopolitical chess moves, each voyage a gambit in the grand game of empire building. When Magellan embarked on his journey to circumnavigate the globe, it wasn't just to prove the earth was round. It was a bid for Spain to stake its claim over the spice trade, to find a western route to the Moluccas, and upset Portugal's monopoly. Talk about sailing with a purpose. Yet, for all the allure of conquest and riches, let's not romanticize the peril. The ocean was a brutal mistress, with storms that could shred sails like paper and waves that could swallow a ship whole. The risk of getting lost was all too real, and when the wind died and the sails hung limp, it was the crew's morale that was at risk of capsizing. Food and water dwindled, tempers flared, and the line between sanity and madness blurred. So next time you punch a destination into your GPS and follow its calm, reassuring voice, spare a thought for those who braved the high seas with little more than a star to guide them and a dream to fuel their journey. The age of discovery was a time of daring ambition and reckless optimism. It was an era when the world seemed limitless and the horizon held infinite possibilities, even if it was sometimes obscured by clouds and dragons. As the ship sails on, the stars twinkling overhead like a celestial map, you realize that the real journey wasn't just the miles traveled, but the courage to set sail into the unknown. And with that, we're primed to dive deeper into the next chapter of this extraordinary tale, where the sea's vast expanse is both a frontier and a formidable challenge. Stay tuned, because the adventure is far from over. And just as you start to feel the gentle lull of the ship beneath you, you're snapped back to reality by the harsh glare of the afternoon sun and the ever-present possibility of chaos looming on the horizon. Welcome to the next chapter of your nautical nightmare, where unpredictable seas and perilous weather are the stars of this not-so-glamorous show. Let's kick off with a little myth-busting, shall we? Picture those romantic paintings of ships gracefully cutting through waves, sails billowing like majestic wings. Now crumple that image like a bad piece of origami, because the truth is far less elegant. The sea was less a serene backdrop, and more a treacherous beast lying in wait. Storms could rip through your flimsy vessel faster than you could say, land ho, leaving destruction in their wake. Take the Spanish Armada, for instance. In 1588, this seemingly invincible fleet met its match not just in battle, but in the wrath of the North Atlantic storms. Of the 130 ships that set sail, a staggering 63 were lost, many to the merciless weather. And if you think that's rough, let's talk about the infamous Cape Horn. This notorious passage near the southern tip of South America was a sailor's worst nightmare, a place where the ocean tossed and turned with reckless abandon. Ships that dared to round the Cape often found themselves at the mercy of howling winds and monstrous waves. It wasn't uncommon for vessels to be stranded for weeks, waiting for a window of calm. The Dutch merchant and explorer Willem Schouten, who first rounded Cape Horn in 1660, didn't mince words. It is the abode of the elements, a sea where shipwreck is the rule rather than the exception. But storms weren't the only threat. Enter scurvy, the silent killer that made sailors' teeth fall out faster than a bad dentist. Caused by a lack of vitamin C, scurvy was a death sentence for crews unprepared for the long haul. In the 18th century, it was estimated that scurvy accounted for more than two-thirds of all maritime deaths on long voyages. James Lind, the British naval surgeon who conducted the first clinical trial on scurvy,
discovered the cure in 1747, citrus fruits, which were as rare as unicorns on these voyages. And then there's piracy, that romanticized blight on maritime history. Pirates weren't the dashing rogues of Hollywood, but desperate men driven by profit and survival. The infamous Blackbeard, or Edward Teach, was less a charming anti-hero and more a ruthless opportunist. By the time of his death in 1718, Blackbeard had amassed a terrifying reputation, but piracy was about more than plunder. It was a reaction to the harsh economic realities of the time, where legal trade routes were heavily taxed and manned by underpaid sailors. The golden age of piracy saw thousands of men turn to the black flag, not for love of adventure, but necessity. But let's not gloss over the economics that turned piracy from a hobby into a full-blown industry. The loot they sought, gold, spices, and even slaves, was tied to the burgeoning global trade network. Ships became floating treasure chests, and the stakes were high. The infamous pirate Captain Kidd wasn't always on the wrong side of the law. Initially commissioned as a privateer, Kidd's descent into piracy was spurred by the promise of untold riches. His eventual capture and execution in 1701 were a stark reminder of piracy's high risks. Now, let's shift gears and talk about the human cost of these maritime escapades. Romantic tales of daring sea battles often omit the grim reality of life aboard these ships. Mortality rates were staggeringly high. For instance, during the early 16th century, it wasn't uncommon for half of a ship's crew to perish on a single voyage. Disease, malnutrition, and the sheer physical toll of life at sea wore down even the hardiest sailors. The journey of Ferdinand Magellan, who set out in 1519 to circumnavigate the globe, is a case in point. Out of the 270 men who began the expedition, only 18 returned, and Magellan himself wasn't among them. Yet despite these grim statistics, the age of discovery mattered. It was a pivotal chapter in human history that reshaped the world, connecting continents and cultures in ways previously unimaginable. The economic and political incentives, riches untapped, empires expanded, were the fuel that propelled these perilous journeys. Explorers like Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus weren't just seafaring adventurers. They were agents of change, albeit ones with questionable navigation skills and a tendency to grossly underestimate distances. These voyages, for all their hardships, laid the groundwork for the modern world. They shifted the axis of power, paving the way for European dominance in global trade. The discovery of the New World, the establishment of sea routes to Asia, and the opening of the spice trade all contributed to an economic boom that transformed societies. The wealth generated from these expeditions funded wars, built cities, and quite literally fueled the fires of the Renaissance. So as the sun dips below the horizon, casting the deck in a warm glow, take a moment to ponder the complex tapestry of history. The Age of Discovery was a time of peril and promise, where the line between legend and reality was as thin as the plank you might walk should you find yourself on the wrong side of a pirate's blade. It was an era where every voyage was a gamble, and the stakes were nothing less than the future of the world. As the sun sinks below the horizon, painting the sea in shades of molten gold, you can't help but ponder the profound changes that the Age of Discovery unleashed upon the world. This wasn't just a story of ships and sailors, but a seismic shift in the way continents interacted, for better or worse. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of the Columbian Exchange, a global swap meet that altered the course of history. First up, let's talk goods. The Columbian Exchange was like history's most ambitious trade show, featuring everything from tomatoes to potatoes. Before these voyages, Europe was a potato-free zone. That humble tuber, native to the Andes, would eventually become a European staple, feeding armies and fueling population booms. We're talking about a crop that could yield up to 4 times the calories per acre compared to old world grains. Ireland, for instance, became so potato-dependent that the infamous potato famine in the 19th century led to a demographic catastrophe. But it's not just potatoes that cross the Atlantic. Imagine a world without tomatoes on your pizza or chilies in your curry. The Columbian Exchange introduced these to Europe, transforming cuisines and setting taste buds ablaze. On the flip side, the Old World sent wheat, cattle, and horses to the Americas.
The reintroduction of horses to the Great Plains transformed indigenous cultures, giving rise to the iconic image of the Plains Indian on horseback, a symbol of freedom and power, albeit one that came with its own set of complexities. Of course, where there's trade, there's also disease. The grim side of the Columbian exchange was the unintentional biological warfare waged on indigenous populations. Smallpox, measles, and influenza were the uninvited guests that decimated native communities. It's estimated that within a century of Columbus's arrival, up to 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas had perished due to these diseases. This wasn't just a tragic loss of life. It was a cultural cataclysm that wiped out entire societies, languages, and traditions. On the flip side, the New World gave Europe a taste of its own medicine, literally. Syphilis, likely brought back by returning sailors, spread like wildfire across Europe. By the 16th century, it was the subject of widespread panic, earning nicknames like the French disease or the Spanish disease, depending on who you asked. The irony: the disease was called the Great Pox to distinguish it from the less severe smallpox, which was busy wreaking havoc across the pond. Now, let's talk ideas. The Age of Discovery wasn't just an exchange of goods and germs. It was a melting pot of ideas and knowledge. The voyages facilitated a new understanding of geography and astronomy. Suddenly, maps needed updating faster than you could say terra incognita. The realization that the Earth was round, flat earthers, wasn't the only revelation. The very notion of longitude and latitude became critical, allowing for more accurate navigation and ultimately the creation of the prime meridian in Greenwich by the late 19th century. The voyages also had an impact on science and philosophy. The sheer vastness and diversity of the New World inspired a new wave of intellectual curiosity. It sparked debates that questioned long-held beliefs, like the Ptolemaic model of the universe, eventually paving the way for the Copernican revolution. This was the era when the seeds of the scientific revolution were sown, leading to a world where reason and evidence began to challenge tradition and superstition. But it's not all enlightenment and epiphanies. The Age of Discovery kick-started the transatlantic slave trade, a dark legacy that would stain global history for centuries. European powers, in their insatiable greed for profit, turned to Africa for labor to fuel their New World colonies. It's estimated that over 12 million Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic in appalling conditions. This wasn't just a trade in human lives. It was the brutal commodification of people, with repercussions that echo into today's world. So, let's take a moment to consider the legacy of these voyages. On one hand, the Age of Discovery connected the world in unprecedented ways, laying the groundwork for globalization. It was a catalyst for progress, innovation, and the spread of ideas. But on the other hand, it brought exploitation, disease, and destruction to countless indigenous communities. The very term discovery is a misnomer, as it overlooks the sophisticated societies that existed long before European ships arrived on their shores. As we reflect on this complex legacy, it's tempting to wonder how those explorers might view today's world. Would Columbus marvel at a globe dotted with airports, satellites, and Wi-Fi signals? Would Magellan, the man who circumnavigated the globe, appreciate the irony of intercontinental flights that take less time than it took him to cross the Pacific? Perhaps Vasco da Gama would be astounded by trade routes that now span the globe, delivering goods with a speed and efficiency that would have seemed like sorcery in his time. And yet, for all the progress, some things remain unchanged. The same economic forces that drove the Age of Discovery, profit, power, and prestige, still shape our world. The quest for resources has moved from spices to silicon, yet the fundamental human drive to explore, to push boundaries, and to seek the unknown endures. The oceans may no longer be the final frontier, but the spirit of discovery lives on in space exploration and the quest for knowledge. In the end, the Age of Discovery was a time of paradoxes. It was an era of great courage and great cruelty, of explorers who charted new worlds and conquerors who destroyed them. It was a period that expanded humanity's horizons while contracting the lives of many. As you ponder these contradictions, remember that history is not just a collection of dates and events, but a tapestry woven with the threads of human ambition, folly, and resilience. So as you gaze at the stars tonight, consider the explorers who once navigated by their light, guided by dreams of new worlds and uncharted seas. Their legacy, for better or worse, is the world we inhabit today, a world still grappling with the consequences of their discoveries, still striving to balance the scales of progress with justice. As the ship gently rocks beneath you, let the lessons of the past illuminate the path forward, reminding us that the true voyage is not just one of distance, but of understanding. In the bustling towns of Roman North Africa, young Augustine was already causing a stir long before he became a saint. This was a guy who loved the buzz of philosophy debates almost as much as he loved not actually attending any of them. Born in 354 AD in Thagast, which would be modern-day Souk Aras, Algeria, Augustine was the kind of student who could talk Aristotle but preferred to party like a rock star. His idea of studying was more like a philosophical pub crawl through the streets of Carthage, where he spent his teenage years. Now, if Carthage sounds familiar, it's because this was the place that once gave Rome a run for its money with a certain Hannibal and his elephants. But by Augustine's time, the city was more into forums than formations of war elephants. Let's dive into one of his most infamous escapades, something that sounds like a petty crime, but which Augustine himself turned into an existential event. We're talking about the Great Pear Heist. Now, theft isn't normally associated with sainthood, but Augustine's life is full of surprises. Picture this: a group of teenage boys, bored out of their minds, wandering through a pear orchard in the dead of night. They weren't hungry, they just wanted to see if they could get away with it. Augustine and his buddies made off with a bunch of pears, not to eat, mind you, but to toss to pigs. This wasn't just vandalism, it was teenage rebellion with a philosophical twist. Augustine later confessed that he stole the pears not for the pears themselves, but for the sheer thrill of doing wrong. Talk about overthinking a misdemeanor. Augustine's reflections on this pear heist are legendary, because he used it to ponder the nature of sin itself. Was it just a prank, or was it his first deep dive into the murky waters of human motivation and morality? Augustine would later write in Confessions that it wasn't the pears he desired, but rather the act of sinning. Somewhere between the orchard and his philosophical musings, Augustine was beginning to cook up ideas that would change the course of Western thought. Who knew that a juvenile delinquency could lead to such high-minded introspection? But let's not forget Monica, Augustine's mother, who deserves her own historical spotlight. Think of her as the original helicopter mom, hovering over Augustine with the persistence of a drone. Monica was a devout Christian who seemed to believe that if she prayed hard enough, she could steer her son away from his wayward ways. Her prayers and tears followed Augustine from Thagast to Carthage and beyond, as if she were trying to sprinkle holy water on his rebellious soul from afar. If you think your mom texts you too much, imagine having Monica as a parent. Augustine later credited her persistence with his eventual conversion, but at the time, it must have felt like he had his own personal spiritual whistleblower. Monica's relentless pursuit of her son's salvation is nothing short of legendary. This was a woman who once followed Augustine to Rome without telling him, just to keep an eye on him. Talk about dedication. While Augustine was out exploring the world of rhetoric and philosophy, living the Roman intellectual's dream, Monica was back home lighting candles and probably muttering a few choice words under her breath. Her influence on Augustine cannot be overstated, though it's safe to say that Augustine probably wished she'd tone it down every once in a while. Augustine's academic life in Carthage was a mixed bag. On one hand, he was a brilliant student, excelling in subjects like rhetoric, which was the ancient equivalent of majoring in communication studies. On the other hand, he was also a notorious party animal, more interested in the lively debates and even livelier parties than in buckling down with his books. Carthage was a vibrant city, a melting pot of cultures and ideas, and Augustine soaked it all up like a sponge. But like the city itself, he was torn between the old pagan ways and the new Christian ideology his mother preached. Life in Carthage wasn't cheap either. Augustine's education was a significant financial burden on his family. Back in the day, attending a school of rhetoric was the equivalent of sending your kid to an Ivy League college. Just imagine the student debt. His father, Patricius, who was a Roman official of some sort, probably had to dip into his rainy day fund to keep Augustine in school, hoping he would one day land a cushy job and pay him back. Spoiler alert, Augustine did not become the financial windfall his father might have hoped for. While in Carthage, Augustine fell in with a group of like-minded young men who called themselves the Eversors, which charmingly translates to the Wreckers. These were the original bad boys, dedicated not to destruction, but to outsmarting everyone around them with their wit and rhetoric. They weren't just troublemakers, they were intellectual hooligans. Augustine's membership in this group is a testament to his youthful rebellion and his desire to challenge the status quo. Augustine's youthful escapades might make him sound like a lost cause, but beneath the surface, his mind was a cauldron of intellectual curiosity and restlessness. His journey from a wild youth in Roman North Africa to one of history's most respected theologians is nothing short of remarkable. Despite the chaos of his early years, Augustine was slowly laying the groundwork for his future transformation. So, here we have it. Augustine, the philosophical prodigy who preferred pranks over lectures, and Monica, his relentless mother, armed with prayers and determination. Through pair thefts and rhetorical rebellions, Augustine's story begins as a tale of youthful indiscretion and maternal devotion, a combination that would eventually lead to a seismic shift in his life and in the broader world of Western thought. In this early chapter of his life, Augustine was just warming up for his future role as a titan of theology. Stay tuned, because things are about to get even more interesting. As Augustine's youthful chaos in Carthage simmered down, he found himself itching for a grander stage, a place where his oratorical flair could shine like a Roman gladiator in full swing. Enter Rome, the city that wasn't just the heart of an empire, but also the epicenter of rhetorical ambition. In 383 AD, Augustine packed his bags, hopefully this time with more books than pears, and set sail for the eternal city. Now, if you think moving to the Big Apple is daunting, try relocating to Rome in the 4th century. This was a city where every stone had a story, and every street corner had witnessed some form of political intrigue. Augustine's Roman escapade began with a pursuit of fame and fortune. He aimed to teach rhetoric to the elite, the ancient version of trying to land a TED talk gig, but finding success in Rome was not as straightforward as a philosophical debate in Carthage. For starters, the competition was fierce. Think of Rome as the Silicon Valley of rhetoric. Everyone was a startup, and Augustine was just another app trying to get noticed. The economic realities were harsh. Teaching gigs were as scarce as an honest politician. But Augustine had something many others didn't, a relentless drive and a knack for charming the toga off anyone. However, Rome wasn't all about eloquent speeches and philosophical musings. Augustine's time there was marked by a flirtation with the Manichaeans, a religious sect that would make today's conspiracy theorists look like amateurs. The Manichaeans spun tales of cosmic battles between light and darkness, a narrative so compelling it could have given Star Wars a run for its money. Augustine, always the intellectual explorer, found their dualistic worldview fascinating. He was drawn to their idea that the material world was inherently evil, which was a convenient excuse for anyone who wanted to shirk responsibility for their actions. It wasn't me, it was the dark forces. An argument that would certainly have made Augustine's Pear heist seem less damning. The Manichaean influence on Augustine was profound, but not everlasting. Their cosmic drama was initially appealing, offering a neat, black and white explanation of the universe. But Augustine, ever the skeptic, would eventually find their views too simplistic. The notion that all bad deeds could be blamed on cosmic forces rather than personal choice didn't sit well with his growing understanding of morality. The philosophical rebel in him couldn't resist poking holes in their doctrine. Augustine's eventual departure from the Manichaeans was a classic case of the student outgrowing the teacher, much like dumping a high school sweetheart for being too one-dimensional. Enter Milan in 384 AD, a city that, unlike Rome, was less about grandeur and more about power. Milan was the administrative capital of the Western Roman Empire, where political and religious decisions were made, and Augustine saw an opportunity. His reputation as a gifted rhetorician preceded him, and he secured a prestigious position as a public speaker, a role that promised both influence and a more stable income. Finally, here was the financial stability that Patricius had hoped for, although it came a bit too late for Augustine's father, who had already shuffled off this mortal coil. But it was in Milan that Augustine met his intellectual nemesis, Bishop Ambrose. If Augustine was a rhetorical rock star, Ambrose was the maestro. Ambrose was no ordinary bishop. He was a man of immense intellect who wielded theology like a general commanding an army. Augustine, intrigued by Ambrose's sermons, found himself drawn to the complex world of Christian thought. Ambrose didn't just preach. He orchestrated theological symphonies that captivated Augustine's mind and heart. This was no small feat, considering Augustine's penchant for questioning everything, including his own existence on a bad day. Ambrose introduced Augustine to the allegorical interpretation of Scripture, a method that unpacked layers of meaning beneath the literal text. This was like handing Augustine the keys to a philosophical treasure chest, and he loved it. The bishop's influence was profound, but it wasn't just his intellectual prowess that impressed Augustine. Ambrose was a political powerhouse, deftly navigating the treacherous waters of church and state. He was the kind of leader who could excommunicate an emperor without breaking a sweat, a level of confidence that Augustine couldn't help but admire. Under Ambrose's guidance, Augustine began to see Christianity not as the simplistic faith of his mother's prayers, but as a sophisticated philosophical system that could rival the Manichaean doctrines he was leaving behind. The intellectual rigor that Ambrose applied to his faith was a game-changer for Augustine. Here was a religion that didn't just demand blind faith, but encouraged deep, thoughtful engagement. Augustine was hooked, and he began to wrestle with the idea of conversion in earnest. But let's not romanticize this period as some seamless spiritual awakening. Augustine's journey toward Christianity was more like a philosophical wrestling match, with his old beliefs and new ideas locked in a heady struggle. He was torn between the material temptations of his current life and the spiritual fulfillment he glimpsed in Ambrose's teachings. It's the age-old dilemma. Do you stick with the devil you know, or leap into the unknown where salvation might, or might not, await? In Milan, Augustine also encountered the Neoplatonists, whose ideas about the nature of reality and the immortality of the soul further fueled his intellectual transformation. The Neoplatonists offered a bridge between his love for classical philosophy and his burgeoning interest in Christianity. Here was a philosophical system that didn't just tolerate a spiritual worldview, but actively embraced it. The Neoplatonists believed in a single, ultimate source of all existence, which sounded suspiciously close to the Christian God. For Augustine, this was like discovering that two of his favorite bands had secretly been collaborating all along. Thus, Augustine's time in Milan was a cosmic cocktail of philosophical exploration, rhetorical triumph, and spiritual questioning. He was at the crossroads of his life, not quite ready to abandon the old ways, but gradually opening up to the new. His mother's prayers seemed to be inching closer to fulfillment, much to Monica's delight. Augustine was a man caught between worlds, a seeker on the brink of a monumental decision, a decision that would not only change his life, but also leave an indelible mark on Western thought. So, as Augustine stood on the precipice of conversion, juggling the allure of worldly success with the pull of spiritual enlightenment, his story was far from over. The journey from Milan's bustling streets to the hallowed halls of Christian theology was just warming up. With Ambrose as his guide, and the intellectual cauldron of Milan bubbling beneath him, Augustine was set to embark on a path that would lead to even greater transformations. Stay tuned, because the road to sainthood is seldom straight, and Augustine's journey was just getting started. As Augustine teetered on the edge of a spiritual epiphany, his life was a whirlwind of intellectual debates, soul-searching, and let's be honest, the occasional existential crisis. You see, conversion, like any good drama, needs a catalyst, and Augustine's came in the form of an eerie, disembodied voice. Picture this, a mature Augustine, tormented by inner conflict, pacing in a garden in Milan, when he hears the sing-song voice of a child chanting, "Take up and read, take up and read." It's almost as if life itself handed him a script with a Hollywood twist, complete with mysterious sound effects. And what does our conflicted protagonist do? He heeds the supernatural suggestion, picks up a Bible, and his eyes land on a passage from the book of Romans. Not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness. Talk about a celestial mic drop. For Augustine, This moment was a divine intervention, a sign that his days of intellectual partying and philosophical dalliances were numbered. It was as if someone had slipped him the ultimate spoiler, revealing the next chapter of his life in one fell swoop. But let's not get carried away on the wings of myth. While the Garden Epiphany makes for a great story, it's worth noting that Augustine's conversion was less about celestial soundtracks and more about the shifting sands of Roman society. By the late 4th century, Christianity was no longer the scrappy underdog. It was the state religion, thanks to Emperor Constantine's conversion some decades earlier. The Roman Empire was a Christian empire, and aligning with Christianity was, quite frankly, smart politics. Augustine, ever the pragmatist, surely recognized that riding the Christian wave offered not just spiritual, but also significant social and professional benefits. Now, let's talk economics, because no conversion story is complete without a peek into the purse strings. Augustine's lifestyle, once lavish and indulgent, took a sharp turn toward austerity post-conversion. Gone were the days of lavish banquets and rhetorical jousting with the Roman elite. Augustine embraced a monastic lifestyle, which was as much about spiritual discipline as it was about economic necessity. Living in a monastic community meant shared resources and a simpler life. Think of it as the original version of downsizing, long before tiny homes were a trend. But don't be fooled by the simplicity. This wasn't just a Marie Kondo-inspired declutter. It was a radical departure from the social norms of the time. Augustine's shift was a rejection of the materialism that permeated Roman society. In a world obsessed with status and wealth, Augustine's new path was a countercultural statement, a declaration that true fulfillment lay in spiritual riches, not in the weight of one's coin purse. The economic realities of Augustine's conversion were also deeply personal. Remember his father, Patricius? Well, he had left Augustine with more moral than material wealth. Augustine's financial situation wasn't exactly dire, but let's just say he wasn't rolling in denarii either. Adopting a monastic lifestyle alleviated some economic pressures, allowing him to focus on his burgeoning theological pursuits without the constant worry of keeping up with the Roman Joneses. So, Augustine embraces a life of prayer, study, and reflection, swapping the hustle and bustle of Roman intellectual circles for the tranquility of religious contemplation. Yet, the story doesn't end with him fading into the background like a monk in a medieval painting. Oh no, Augustine was just getting started. With his newfound faith, he became a theological powerhouse, penning works that would influence Christian thought for centuries. His Confessions, a blend of autobiography and philosophical musings, offered a raw, introspective look at his spiritual journey, proving that even saints have skeletons in their closets, or Pear heists, in this case. Now, let's debunk another myth. Augustine's conversion was not an overnight sensation. It was a gradual process, more akin to a simmering stew of doubt, curiosity, and revelation. His intellectual rigor and philosophical background made him uniquely equipped to tackle complex theological issues, but it also meant that he didn't take the leap of faith lightly. The transition from Manichaeism to Christianity wasn't a simple flip of a switch, but a journey through a labyrinth of belief systems, each offering its own tantalizing promise of truth. As Augustine settled into his new role as a Christian thinker, he didn't shy away from the big questions. His writings delved into the nature of evil, the essence of God, and the intricacies of free will, laying the groundwork for debates that would ripple through the ages. This was a man who had once questioned everything, and now he was channeling that relentless inquiry into the service of his faith. And while his conversion was undoubtedly fueled by personal revelations and spiritual insights, it's impossible to ignore the broader socio-political context. Augustine's journey was emblematic of a larger trend within the Roman Empire, a shift toward Christianity that was as much about power dynamics as it was about divine inspiration. For Augustine, the path to sainthood was paved with both personal conviction and the undeniable current of history itself. So, where does this leave us? With Augustine trading the raucous streets of Carthage and Rome for the contemplative halls of monastic life, his story continues to unfold. His conversion was not the end, but a beginning, a springboard for a life dedicated to exploring the mysteries of faith and the human condition. And as we move forward in his tale, we'll see that Augustine's journey was far from a solitary pilgrimage. It was a reflection of an empire in transition, a testament to the enduring power of ideas to shape the course of history. Stay tuned, because Augustine's legacy is about to take center stage, and trust me, it's a performance you won't want to miss. As Augustine's journey from Milan to sainthood continued, the next chapter in his life was about to unfold in the sun-soaked landscapes of North Africa. This wasn't just a geographical relocation. It was a return to his roots, a homecoming fraught with old ghosts and new ambitions. Augustine arrived back in North Africa around 388 AD, armed with a burgeoning faith and a mind sharper than a Roman gladius. But if he thought this would be a quiet retreat to the provinces, he was in for a surprise. Augustine was about to become the theological heavyweight of Hippo, a role that would demand every ounce of his rhetorical prowess and philosophical insight. North Africa in Augustine's day was no backwater. This region was a vibrant tapestry of Roman influence, indigenous cultures, and a bustling Christian community. Hippo Regius, now modern-day Annaba in Algeria, was a strategic port city with a thriving economy and a complex social fabric. It was here that Augustine would eventually become bishop, but not before navigating a landscape riddled with political intrigue and religious tension. Let's just say that if Augustine were a chess piece, he'd be the bishop, moving diagonally to sidestep the many challenges that lay ahead. Upon his return, Augustine initially joined a monastic community at Thagast, his hometown, where he embraced a life of contemplative study and communal living. This was the ancient version of hitting the reset button, a chance to recharge and recalibrate before diving into the turbulent waters of ecclesiastical leadership. But Augustine's plans for a quiet life of reflection were soon upended. In 391 AD, during a visit to Hippo, he was practically ambushed into priesthood by a congregation that recognized his potential. Talk about an impromptu career change. Imagine going to a church service and leaving with a new job title, one that would eventually evolve into bishop by 395 AD. Augustine's rise to bishophood was not just a personal triumph. It was a strategic coup for the Christian community in Hippo. His intellectual rigor and rhetorical flair were assets in a region where religious debates were as common as Roman sandals. The Donatists, schismatic Christian sect that insisted on the purity of the church, were particularly influential in North Africa. They believed that the validity of the sacraments depended on the moral character of the clergy. Augustine, ever the pragmatist, argued against this rigid stance, emphasizing the church's role as a hospital for sinners, not a sanctuary for saints. His views on grace and sin were groundbreaking, challenging the notion that human weakness could derail divine purpose. In Hippo, Augustine found himself at the heart of a theological battleground, with controversy as his constant companion. His writings during this period, including Confessions and City of God, were not just theological musings. They were strategic publications crafted to influence Christian doctrine and assert the Church's authority in a rapidly changing world. Confessions, written around 400 AD, was a candid, introspective masterpiece that laid bare Augustine's spiritual journey. It was a PR move of epic proportions, humanizing a theological titan and making his spiritual struggles relatable to the masses. Augustine's candid admission of past sins, Pear and all, was a revolutionary act, offering a blueprint for personal transformation that resonated with believers and skeptics alike. City of God, on the other hand, was Augustine's magnum opus, a sprawling work that tackled the existential crisis facing the Roman Empire after the sack of Rome in 410 AD. This was a time when the empire's invincibility was in question, and the pagan blame game was in full swing. Augustine's response was a tour de force of theological reasoning, arguing that earthly cities may fall, but the city of God endures. It was a masterstroke of theological spin, reframing the narrative and providing a spiritual coping mechanism for an empire on the brink. Augustine's views on sin and grace were as controversial as they were influential. He saw sin as an inherent human condition, a kind of spiritual gravity that pulled people away from God. But grace, in his view, was the divine counterforce, an unearned gift that could lift humanity out of its moral mire. This wasn't just theological poetry. It was a radical rethinking of human nature and divine intervention. Augustine's emphasis on grace laid the groundwork for debates that would ripple through Christianity for centuries, influencing theologians from Aquinas to Luther. Yet, Augustine was not without his critics. His detractors accused him of being too lenient on sin, too accommodating of human frailty. The Pelagians, in particular, balked at Augustine's notion of original sin and the necessity of divine grace for salvation. They argued for free will and the inherent goodness of human nature, a charmingly optimistic view that Augustine found dangerously naive. For Augustine, the Pelagian perspective was akin to handing a toddler a sword and expecting them not to cause chaos. He countered their arguments with a fervor that was both intellectual and personal, defending his views with the precision of a seasoned rhetorician. Amidst these theological skirmishes, Augustine's role as bishop also demanded a keen political acumen. The church in Hippo was not just a spiritual institution, it was a power player in local politics. Augustine navigated these waters with the deftness of a diplomat, balancing the needs of his congregation with the broader challenges facing the Christian community in North Africa. His leadership was a blend of pastoral care and strategic foresight, ensuring that the church remained a beacon of stability in a tumultuous region. Economically, Augustine's bishopric was a lesson in resource management. The church was responsible not just for spiritual guidance, but also for the welfare of its community. Augustine oversaw charitable works, provided for the needy, and maintained the church's infrastructure, tasks that required both compassion and financial savvy. In this sense, Augustine was not just a theological leader, but a community organizer, ensuring that the church met both spiritual and practical needs. Augustine's prolific writing career during his time in Hippo was nothing short of monumental. He penned over 100 works, ranging from theological treatises to letters and sermons. His correspondence alone offers a fascinating glimpse into the intellectual and spiritual issues of his time. Augustine's letters reveal a man deeply engaged with the world, addressing everything from doctrinal disputes to personal advice on living a Christian life. His writings were a lifeline for believers grappling with the complexities of faith in a rapidly evolving world. In essence, Augustine's return to North Africa was not a retreat, but a renaissance, a period of intense intellectual and spiritual activity that solidified his legacy as one of Christianity's most influential thinkers. His rise to bishophood in Hippo was marked by political maneuvering, theological innovation, and a relentless pursuit of truth. Augustine was a man of contradictions, an intellectual powerhouse who embraced humility, a sinner who became a saint, and a leader who challenged the very foundations of his faith to build something enduring. As we leave Augustine in the heart of Hippo, his story is far from over. The challenges he faced were not just personal but emblematic of a broader struggle within Christianity to define its identity and purpose. Augustine's life was a testament to the power of ideas to shape history, a reminder that the journey from sinner to saint is fraught with obstacles, but also rich with possibility. Stay tuned, because Augustine's legacy is about to take even more unexpected turns, and trust me, you won't want to miss how this theological saga continues to unfold. Augustine's legacy isn't just a dusty footnote in the annals of history. It's a living, breathing testament to the power of ideas to transcend time. His writings, after all these centuries, are still very much alive, sparking debates about faith, reason, and the essence of human nature. The guy had a knack for diving deep into the human psyche, kind of like Freud without the couch. Take his Confessions, for example. It's not just spiritual autobiography, it's the original tell-all, exposing the inner workings of a mind wrestling with the divine and the mundane. Who knew a 4th century bishop could be so relatable? But let's peel back the layers of the saintly varnish. Augustine wasn't just a theological titan, he was a man who grappled with doubt and desire. He didn't emerge from the womb with a halo. He was, in many ways, a product of his tumultuous times. His era was one of chaos and transition, with the Roman Empire teetering on the edge of collapse and new religious ideas vying for supremacy. Augustine's genius was in synthesizing these influences, crafting a vision of Christianity that could withstand the shifting sands of history. His influence on Western thought is like that of a rock dropped into a pond, sending ripples that continue to reach distant shores. Augustine's ideas on original sin and grace laid the groundwork for theological debates that would echo through the corridors of time, influencing thinkers like Thomas Aquinas and Martin Luther. The man practically invented the concept of introspection, making it okay to question one's faith and motivations. Before Augustine, the idea that you could engage in a spiritual tug-of-war with yourself didn't exactly have a lot of traction. He made it part of the Christian experience, a sort of divine check-in with your soul. And let's not forget his magnum opus, The City of God. Written in the wake of Rome's sack in 410 AD, this work was Augustine's attempt to make sense of a world turned upside down. It was a comforting narrative for those who saw the eternal city burning and wondered if the end was nigh. Augustine argued that earthly cities might crumble, but God's city was eternal. It was as if he was saying, don't panic, Rome wasn't built in a day, and it won't be rebuilt in one either. This was Augustine's way of reframing the narrative, offering hope and perspective in a time of despair. Economically speaking, Augustine's ideas were as much about managing the soul's ledger as they were about balancing earthly accounts. He saw the church as a moral compass, guiding people through the economic and social upheavals of the time. His views on wealth and poverty, charity and justice, were revolutionary, challenging the status quo and advocating for a church that served as a beacon of hope for the downtrodden. Augustine's notion of the church as a hospital for sinners wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was a radical rethinking of the church's role in society. Yet, for all his towering achievements, Augustine was not without his flaws. He was a man of contradictions, a thinker who could write profoundly about love while wrestling with his own failures in that department. His views on women, for instance, have not aged well. Augustine's Confessions might have been groundbreaking, but his musings on gender often reflected the patriarchal norms of his time. While he elevated philosophical discussions, he didn't quite extend the same courtesy to women, viewing them through a lens tinted with theological bias. It's a sharp reminder that even the most enlightened minds are not immune to the prejudices of their era. Augustine's life was a testament to the messy, unpredictable nature of human existence. He was a man who loved deeply, sinned greatly, and thought profoundly. His journey from a rebellious youth to a revered saint is a story of redemption and resilience, a narrative that resonates because it mirrors the complexities of our own lives. Augustine wasn't just a saint with a halo, but a human being with all the accompanying messiness. So, what can we take away from Augustine's legacy? For one, the enduring power of ideas to shape and reshape the world. Augustine's thoughts on sin, grace, and the nature of God continue to influence not just theological discourse, but philosophical inquiry and even political theory. His writings serve as a constant reminder that the questions he grappled with about faith, morality, and existence are as relevant today as they were in the crumbling corridors of the Roman Empire. In the end, Augustine's story is a compelling blend of romance and reality, a tale of a flawed man who dared to ask the big questions, and, in doing so, changed the course of history. His life is a reminder that even in our imperfection, we can strive for understanding and leave a legacy that transcends our own limitations. Whether you're a scholar, a seeker, or just someone looking to understand the human condition a little better, Augustine offers a roadmap, a beacon of thought in a world that can often feel directionless. And there you have it, the life and influence of St. Augustine, a story that proves that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a stolen pair and end with a saintly legacy. So, as you drift off to sleep, let Augustine's tale inspire a few dreams of your own. Who knows? Maybe you'll wake up with a new perspective on the world, or at least with the urge to avoid any late-night fruit thefts. After all, in the grand tapestry of history, even the smallest threads can weave the most enduring patterns.